Coming at number 10, we have Shocker. I think back when this villain was created, the idea of having someone who had vibrations as their superpower would have been a little bit harder to make fun of. Now, many of you probably know Shocker. He has had a few moments in the sun, popping up in video games, and he even has a moment as one of the henchmen of the Vulture. Now, you think someone who is canon in the MCU wouldn't fit onto this list, but when we break him down, we start to learn that Shocker isn't that shocking. It would seem that this villain has a knack for losing to Spider-Man every single time, and it's probably because his powers aren't that impressive. He can make shockwaves that blast through the air, and he can make vibration shields. Yeah, I'm not that impressed by what you have to offer. In recent years, we have seen less and less of this punchline of a villain, as I think the writers have seen that his time has come and he will soon be put to bed. As a kid, I always got him and Electro mixed up because I thought Shocker meant that he was electrocuting people because he was shocking them. Well, at least for the new generation, you won't have those problems because this guy is going to be gone pretty soon. Coming at number 9, we have White Rabbit. I mean, right when we start breaking down this villain, you will learn why she is on this list. It's one thing to be a down and out loser who's had enough of the cruel world and now wants to dive into a world of crime because everything else has let them down. But when you come from a rich family and you turn to crime just for the sake of being angsty, then I don't really have much compassion for you, and your character isn't really relatable. The White Rabbit, also known as Lorena Dodson, built her persona off the Alice in Wonderland book. She thought that would be a cool and edgy way to get into the world of crime. I think she just indulged in too many psychedelics and maybe went off the deep end. I wouldn't be surprised if this character was inspired by the rise of LSD in the 80s when this character was birthed. In terms of powers, she has zero. All she has is a bad attitude and a general understanding of martial arts. She's not a villain that any of us are clamoring for. Coming in at number 8, we have Mindworm. You know, for some of these villains, it seems that the writers went to so much work to really come up with someone who was interesting and had motivations for evil, but then they just throw them in the toilet, and that's what really happens with Mindworm. Mindworm starts off great. He has powers from birth. He's some sort of mutant kid with a huge head. Of course, he's weird and kids don't like him, but at least his parents love his huge cranium. But what Mindworm doesn't know is that he's feeding off the psionic energy of his parents, draining their brain. Eventually, he gets too greedy with this and he kills his own mother and father. He didn't mean to do this. He was just a young mutant kid who didn't know any better, and now he was an orphan. From there, he was bullied in the orphanage and he learns how to use his powers. Eventually, he grows up and is living in a New York apartment where he's feeding off all the people in the building and getting pretty strong off this. But Spider-Man moves in and he senses that someone's trying to suck out his brain energy. The two have a clash and Mindworm is killed by some gang members. Like, all of that work into building up who this guy is, and he was gone just like that. What a waste.
Number 7. Broke Black Cat's nose and heart. Venom wanted everything to do with Spider-Man. He wanted to take away everything, starting of course with his love life. So in Amazing Spider-Man 3:16, he goes after another close acquaintance. This time it's Black Cat. We see her in a train of thought, wondering where Spider-Man had moved to. How peculiar indeed, I wonder. So she's come to realize that her and the Spider should be together, and then now Venom comes in just to ruin her entire day. Venom attacks and figures she must know where he is, although she legitimately doesn't. So before Venom heads out, he casually mentions that Parker's wife didn't know where he was either, adding insult to injury, literally. She got a broken nose, and then he's like, hey, by the way, he's married, so your night just went from good to the opposite. What a terrible night too. Imagine getting your nose broken and then someone's like, hey, by the way, she's married. Number 6, leave a trail. When Eddie Brock was doing time at Rikers Island, his cellmate just happened to be Cletus Cassidy, who was in there for, let's just say, some horrible things. So when Venom came and reunited there with Eddie, part of the symbiote was left behind as they were breaking out, taking over Cletus Cassidy. This guy was horrible beforehand. I mean, he was in there because he took out tons of guys and he bragged about it the entire time. He's sick. So that plus the symbiote equals Carnage, making its first debut in Amazing Spider-Man 361, Carnage Part 1. He's one of the biggest, baddest villains in the comic, and I'm actually looking forward to seeing Woody Harrelson play him in the live-action Venom sequel. Now, while most of this can be pinned on Cletus being the main problem here, we have to add it to the list. always make sure you don't leave any space goop behind, especially not in prison. Come on, Venom, who do you think's gonna grab it? Number 5, ditch the gear. Sometimes when you don't need something anymore, you drop it like it's hot. Like that scene from Forrest Gump, where Forrest runs out of his leg braces. But now sometimes when you realize you don't need something and you get rid of it, sometimes you just happen to be Venom, and sometimes that thing you no longer need is Angelo Fortunato. So back in 2005, Marvel wanted to reboot Venom. So the new Venom host was Don Fortunato, after he won the symbiote in an auction. What a great win, by the way. I would definitely bet on that. He gave the suit to his son Angelo to make him more tough. Okay, sure, it works. Hey, trust me, man, it works. Eddie warned him about the risks, but Angelo didn't listen. Angelo attacked Spider-Man and ripped out his heart, only to discover that it was just an imposter. And then after a fight with Spider-Man, Angelo just left out of fear. He was getting his butt kicked, he wanted nothing to do with it. And Venom wasn't a fan of that, so he left the host mid-air. He just dropped him like a top. But his gear wasn't working properly after the fight Angelo had just caused, so how unfortunate is that? Number 4, killed Uncle Ben. On Earth 2301, better known as Marvel's Mangaverse, we see Ben Parker part of the Spider Clan. He's skilled and ambitious, and he even plans to open his own martial arts school. How badass is that? So during this time, he was teaching a young Peter Parker the ways of the Spider Clan. When one day Peter was rushing to avoid being late to the dojo, he was surprised to see all the lights were off. Weird. I wonder if there's like a surprise party or something, or maybe Venom's here. Let's hope it's the first one. With his last words being, "With great power comes great responsibility," he died at the hands of Venom. There's a nice scene later on where the two talk again, and Uncle Ben gives the advice needed to Peter in this dreamlike sequence. It's beautiful. But the damage Venom did on this Earth was permanent. And sad too, quite sad. Number 3, Lee Price. When Venom bonds to a host, depending on who that person is, things could be manageable. Like Eddie Brock, for example, things are manageable, it's kind of workable. But sometimes they can be even worse than before. Like in the case of Lee Price. Lee had a pretty rough time growing up. He was bullied, and his father wasn't the best role model by any way, and he treated his mother in an awful way as well. Just not a great guy, not a great house. So in order to escape this horrid living situation, Lee thought it best to burn down the apartment, all while his parents were still in there. Like I said, not a nice guy. And to get away with it, he blamed it all on a mutant with pyrokinesis, who at the time was his friend. So Lee suppressed this for years, and he grew up actually believing that the boy had actually done this. And he also thought that his dad had abandoned him the whole time. That's how far his brain has gone believing this. Later in life, he spent 5 years as a ward of the state before joining the army, until an explosion resulted in the loss of a couple squad members and a couple of fingers. Already a tough life, now enter Venom. You know it's bad when even Venom is trying to unbond with you. That's how you know. Lee used the symbiote for awful things, so much so that Venom was actually relieved once Lee had left the picture. Number 2, Anne Weying. Anne first met Eddie Brock at Empire State University. She made her comic book debut back in Amazing Spider-Man issue 375. She reflects on how once upon a time her and Eddie were in love. That's right, he was smart, witty, with a boyish charm that swept her off her feet. So what happened? Well, while they were married, Eddie became a journalist for the Daily Globe, and she was a lawyer. So far sounds great. Sounds like a lovely household with people doing great work. After she divorced him, things only got worse for her. Like for example, I don't know, she was shot by the villain Sin Eater. Yeah. And then after that, Eddie figured it's a good idea to loan her some of the symbiote to heal her up. Now it worked, but the only downside is now we have a she-Venom for a bit. She ended up ending the lives of 2 men who attacked her, so once the symbiote was returned to Eddie, she had to live with all of those memories. Unlike Lee, who had time to kind of erase and forget and just trick his mind into believing he didn't do these horrible things. Anne had this for like a hot minute, and then it went away while she was an adult. She's like, I know what happened. And it doesn't work out well for her. She was traumatized until the end of her life. She couldn't even leave her own apartment. Even for such a short amount of time, Venom can cause quite stress levels. Number 1, planetary attack. In Venom Space Knight issue 8, the symbiote teaches Flash Thompson a lesson about its past. Back to where it all began. Back to where the first host was born. Yeah, so after the two had bonded, he went back to his homeworld and took out everybody. Now all that remains are just graves of the dead. Venom describes this first host as a cruel and twisted soul, one who showed Venom the cruelty and twistedness of his own soul. He killed everybody on this planet, so naturally I have to put him at number 1.
Number 10 formed the Avengers. If you thought Nick Fury brought the Avengers together, then you might be surprised to hear this. In the comics, however, it was not Fury's plot that brought all of Earth's mightiest heroes together, but Loki's. Granted, Loki hadn't planned on doing so, and in the end it actually resulted in way more trouble for him and many other villains in the Marvel-verse besides than he could have ever imagined. Loki was the first villain the team would come up against in Avengers issue number 1, and the villain who would unite them together, much like in the MCU actually, but with less scepters and invasions and with more tricks and illusions and like magic. Loki tricked the Hulk into destroying a train track, thereby endangering human lives. And although no one was hurt because the Hulk actually saved everyone from his own breaking of the train track, the people still saw the Hulk as a monster, and it was this event that brought the Avengers together. In the end, it was revealed that Loki was behind all of it, and the Avengers ended up uniting to defeat him. So yeah, this was one of the worst things Loki kinda did to himself even. That's super tricksy. Number 9. United Villains. It almost felt like Loki was trying to make up for doing something really good for the heroes in the world, and for, you know, causing a bunch of harmful things for himself when he brought the Avengers together with this plot. During the Acts of Vengeance crossover, Loki, under the guise of a businessman, used his skills as a master manipulator to bring together the Prime Movers, a very contradictory team of powerful villains who all hated the Avengers and heroes in general, and sought to destroy them by attacking them with less conventional villains. The team was made up of Dr. Doom, Kingpin, Mandarin, Wizard, Magneto, and Red Skull, and their plan was actually pretty solid. It sounds like it wouldn't work, but it actually worked pretty well. However, even Loki couldn't manage to keep the group together, and they ended up breaking up, mostly due to everyone's mutual hatred of Red Skull. Which, yeah, I get it. Also, when you put Magneto and Red Skull on a team together, I mean, what do you expect to happen? They're obviously gonna break up. It's a terrible match. Number 8. Thor croaks. Are we going to talk about the frog thing? You bet we're gonna talk about the frog thing, because you know, this is a part 1, so we gotta talk about it. One of the most bizarre and yet great schemes Loki has committed to date was when he devised to have Thor turned into a frog in order to get his do-good brother out of the way so that he might rule Asgard in his place. Not only is this awful because, you know, turning your brother into a frog is never a nice thing to do, but we aren't just talking about anyone here. This is Thor. The transformation was even worse for the God of Thunder, who often prides himself on his prowess and strength as a warrior. As a frog, he was robbed of his natural sense of courage and his eagerness for battle initially, and as Frog Thor, he had to rediscover this before eventually, of course, being returned to his standard form, and getting revenge back on Loki, because that's how this always goes, unless we're in like an alternate Earth.
Coming in at number 7, we have Gibbon. We got back-to-back orphanage stories for you. In fact, this one sounds like a cross between Mindworm and Robin. Gibbon is basically the missing link. He has all the abilities of a chimp that are amplified way up. He's got super strength, speed, awareness, reflexes. This guy is off the charts when you're talking about his Madden stats. But because of his monkey-like ways, the kids didn't really like him in the orphanage, and he was never adopted. Now this ended with him growing up and leaving like a regular dude, but now he was just a freak with no money, so he decided he could use his mutations to make some cash. And what's the best way for an oddity to make a quick buck? Well, the circus, of course. There you would think he would be among his people, but he was rejected once again, and now he turned to a life of villainy. When we first see Gibbon, he's just a dude that has some monkey skills, but in later renditions of his character, he looks like a full-on ape man. And even though he has the abilities to take down Spidey, the clashes between the two always end up with Gibbon on his butt. Coming in at number 6, we have the Answer. Now this guy is actually pretty cool. He's just used in a very lame way, and his name sucks. The Answer was already a skilled assassin. He was working for the mob boss of all mob bosses, Wilson Fisk. Anyone Fisk wanted taken down, he was all over it. And part of why he was so good at his job was because the Answer, at this time he was known as Aaron Nichols, is extremely intelligent. He showcases genius level problem solving skills, and he can come up with the answer to any problem. And this is all before he ever gets any sort of superpowers. There was a time in comics when the Kingpin was just handing out superpowers, but you don't give the first powers to someone you can't trust, so he of course gave his first dose of super juice to his buddy Aaron. But at first glance, nothing happened, which is probably a relief and a bummer, because if you take some sort of experimental drug to give yourself powers, you want to get the superpowers, but you also don't want to come out a freak. But later, the answer learns that he has one of the most powerful superpowers I have ever heard of. No matter what the situation, when he is faced with a conflict, his body will supply him with the powers to counter who or whatever he's fighting. So normally he's just a guy, but when the time calls for it, he can fly or create force fields or get super strength. But after a run-in with Spidey that he wins, the character just kind of disappears and we don't see him that much. This guy fits on this list because of the wasted potential.
Number 5. Used as a pawn in the Civil War. This is more exclusive to the movies, as Bucky didn't play quite as active a role in the first Civil War itself in the comics, but Winter Soldier was a huge part of the reason Iron Man and Captain America came to blows in the MCU's Civil War. Winter Soldier was revealed to be an assassin who was actually Captain America's brainwashed former BFF, James Buchanan Barnes. Gasp! Barnes was framed for the explosive attack on the Vienna International Center during the signing of the Sokovia Accords by Helmut Zemo to create a rift between the supers. Barnes was free and was seeking to learn more of his true past, but Zemo also reactivated his programming to take hold of the Winter Soldier once more so that he could use him to tear apart the Avengers and turn them against one another, especially after he revealed that the Winter Soldier was actually the one responsible for killing Tony's parents. Number 4. Frozen. Like Cap, Bucky Barnes was also frozen, being plunged into frozen waters and later retrieved by a Soviet submarine. Being frozen not only doesn't sound pleasant, because, you know, it's cold and uncomfortable and it hurts, but also it sounds pretty deadly. Bucky was lucky he survived, actually. In fact, the scientists that were to study him weren't even sure that it would be possible to revive him, and after studying him for 2 weeks without finding any traces of the super soldier serum that they had been looking for and hoping to find in his blood, they decided to put him back on ice. Bucky was put into stasis mode for 9 years before he would be revived again so that he could be transformed and weaponized. Number 3. Brainwashed. Bucky was believed dead after he went missing in action. In reality, we later learned that while he had lost his arm in the incident that people believed had killed him, Bucky himself had actually survived. Unfortunately, it was the Soviet Union who had found him and took him in. Keeping his discovery a secret, they brainwashed Barnes, making him loathe the West, turning him into a cyborg, giving him a cybernetic arm in place of the one that he'd lost, and began training him to turn him into their very own weapon and assassin. Number 2. Recaptured. The Winter Soldier, it should be noted, has escaped his captors in the past, but sadly, due to having his brains kinda scrambled, was never able to free himself fully due to the fact that he found himself confused without his handlers and lost. After the assassination of Senator Harry Baxter, the Winter Soldier missed making his extraction point and instead disappeared, going off the grid. Unfortunately for him, without his puppet masters controlling him, he didn't really know where to turn or what to do, and he ended up being recaptured by them shortly thereafter, eventually being located in New York and then taken back in. They decided that his return to America must have triggered something in him, wiped his brain, and were careful to note in his file that missions that would take him to the USA should be avoided in the future. Number 1. Used as a deadly weapon. In the MCU and in the comics, the Winter Soldier is brainwashed and programmed to be an assassin and a weapon, which is probably why he and Black Widow get along so well in the comics and even end up together romantically now and then. They both understand what it's like to be made into a monster, to be manipulated into doing evil deeds that they probably ordinarily wouldn't have done otherwise, but that they still obviously carry a lot of guilt about. The Winter Soldier was used to take out a ton of targets over the years, including Howard Stark and Maria Stark in the MCU, and in the comics, Nomad, Wolverine's love Itsu Akihiro, and President John F. Kennedy, to name a few. Number 10. Mind wiped. While in current continuity this might not make as much sense given many people believe that Emma is in fact more powerful than Charles, and I've actually seen her kick his butt before, regardless of your opinions on who would win in a telepathic battle, this happened before Emma was as developed when it came to her skill set. Professor X and Moira McTaggart came to visit Emma when she was working as a dancer at the Hellfire Club. Being Emma, she didn't have any shame in what she was doing and used her powers to get more money out of the gentlemen who came to the club to watch her dance. She tried to use this trick on Charles, who offered a different path for her, a place at his school. When Emma refused his offer, he ultimately decided to wipe her mind of their ever meeting. Whether this was for better or worse remains to be seen. Charles thought it was for the best, but I would argue having your mind wiped against your will is never really a good thing. Number 9 was lied to. I mean, everyone was pretty much lied to about this, but you'd think at least Scott would share his plans with the woman that he loved. He didn't though, because he knew what Emma's answer would be, so rather than open up, he kept his mouth shut and kept it from her. What am I talking about? Cyclops and Wolverine's creation of the X-Force. While Emma is all for moral ambiguity, even X-Force for her and many others was seen as a general bad idea and taking things a little too far. The other thing, of course, was that neither she nor any of the other X-Men were even consulted on this decision, which of course made the whole revelation a lot worse. And before we move on to our number 8 spot, just a quick reminder to give that like a click if you haven't already. Seriously, if you click like, it makes your day better. It is statistically proven. Number 8, choked by Medusa. I mean, this whole event was not necessarily great in my opinion for Emma or the X-Men or the Inhumans. Not a high moment overall. At the very least, just the outfit that Emma is wearing here is something else. Super protective shoulder pads and a giant belt buckle. It's definitely a statement. I'm just not sure it's a good one, especially when I'm used to Emma being such a fashionable character. That belt buckle is the thing that really bothers me in this outfit. Why is the belt buckle so big? It's like as big as her almost her entire midsection. Who made that belt? Is it made for giants? Anyways, it's fine. It just really bothers me when belt buckles are that big. What happened to Emma in Inhumans vs. X-Men that was really so terrible though, was how she ended up getting her butt kicked by Medusa, who used her hair powers to choke Emma. Emma was unable to use her telepathy while in her diamond form, and despite being in her diamond form, actually could have potentially been crushed by Medusa's hair if not for the intervention of Havoc, who saved her here. She was already beginning to break actually under the pressure when he showed up. Whew, that was a close one. You can see a piece of her fall. I don't know what piece that was, but hopefully nothing too valuable. Number 7, being named Pretender. What could be worse than being referred to as a traitor? Well, how about when Scarlet Witch was referred to as an imposter? This was the new label she was given after it was revealed that she was not actually a mutant, but had been led to believe that she was one for most of her life, due to the High Evolutionary disguising her and her twin brother as both mutants after experimenting on them, and apparently giving them powers himself. During the Dawn of X relaunch in an issue of X-Men, we actually see stories being told of Scarlet Witch where young mutants are taught to refer to her as a pretender, someone who posed as a mutant but was not one and could not be trusted. Seems a little unfair considering that Wanda herself did not know her true origin until much later in life. She wasn't lying, she had been manipulated into believing she was truly a mutant and Magneto's daughter. Number 6, death of her family. Even in the MCU, Wanda has a tragic origin story. In the cinematic universe, she and her brother Pietro were orphaned at a young age after they managed to survive an attack that collapsed their apartment. Their parents were killed in the explosion that decimated their home, but they survived after a second missile landed but did not explode. However, this experience would go on to haunt them for the rest of their days, with the name on the missile being burned into their memories for years to come. And that name, of course, was Stark, which is why when we first meet the Maximoff twins in Age of Ultron, they are enemies and not allies of the Avengers. Number 5, having Magneto for a father. At least for the time she did. While in the comics, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch are no longer considered the children of Magneto, they still had him as a father for many years, and across many alternate Earths as well. While Magneto might be good with magnetizing, he is not very good at parenting. Magneto is usually a pretty strict father who has demanded much from his children over the years. I think Wanda, in terms of having a caring parent, was actually better off with her sentient cow mom that the High Evolutionary created. Number 4, spell backfire. Even when Wanda tries to do good, she can't catch a break. In the X-Men Empire series tie-in, Scarlet Witch seeks to right her wrongs by bringing back all those mutants lost in the massacre at Genosha. She is trying to atone for her past and all the harm that she has brought to mutant kind. But poor Wanda can't seem to catch a break. Her ritual to revive the dead backfires and instead simply turns those that she's trying to bring back into zombie mutants, instead of bringing them, fully back to life. To make matters worse, we later find out that Doctor Strange warned her against trying to make amends for her sins this way, telling her she couldn't do what had already been done. This made Wanda think that she simply needed to shift her focus instead of realizing that she needed to actually forge new paths as opposed to undoing old tragedies. Number 3, Vision's death. Going back to the MCU for a moment, one of the worst things that happened to Elizabeth Olsen's Scarlet Witch was the death of Ultron in Infinity War. Wanda had to kill her synthezoid lover herself after Thanos showed up to attack Wakanda during an attempted procedure to safely remove the Mind Stone from Vision, attempted by Black Panther's brilliant sister, the Princess Shuri. As the procedure was cut short and everyone was pulled into the fray, Thanos was on his way to claim that stone when Viz asked Wanda to destroy it, and by extension, destroy him. She initially refused, but reluctantly agreed when Viz pressed her and insisted that she wouldn't and couldn't hurt him with her powers, and that all he felt when she used them on him was her. No pain, just her. Aw, so cute. Through tears, Scarlet Witch used her powers to destroy the stone, only to watch Thanos show up and use the Time Stone to rewind time, bring Vision back to life, so that he could destroy him by ripping the Mind Stone out of his head very painfully. Yikes! Number 2, Possessed by Chthon. This is one of those times that Wanda was made a villain truly without any of her own intent steering her there. Wanda was actually marked by Chthon at birth to act as the Elder God's vessel, should he find a way to return. Chthon would actually succeed in possessing Wanda and using her to return on more than one occasion, though the first time around was probably the worst, when Mordred summoned Chthon via a ritual, allowing the god to basically take hold of Wanda and leaving the Avengers powerless against his will. Fortunately, the disaster that would be Chthon's return was averted before the ritual could be fully completed. Thank goodness for dolls with parts of Wanda's soul in them. That's what happened. Number 1, losing her children. If you were to ask Wanda what one of the worst things that ever happened to her was, I'm sure she would likely answer the loss of her children. Although she would get her 2 twin boys, Billy and Tommy, back when their souls were basically reborn into our world, reincarnating them, she would never really get back the family that she had initially willed into existence. Using her power and from her desire, Wanda made it possible for her and Vision to have children together, and Wanda gave birth to 2 twin boys. However, when others learned that they weren't real and that their existence was kind of making reality unstable, they forced Scarlet Witch to confront the truth, temporarily destroying or displacing her children. Since they weren't really fully destroyed, because they kind of did come back, but just in a really weird comic book way.
Number 10, a healthy diet. What makes a deadly space goop even more terrifying? Well, let's start with its choice of meal. Us. He likes to eat us and our brains. In The Amazing Spider-Man issue 333, Venom said to Spider-Man, "We want to eat your brain." Now, him just saying that to you must be intimidating enough, let alone actually doing it, which we see in Venom the Hunger issue 1. He even surprises himself too when it goes from just being a threat to an actual thing that happens. The symbiote needs to feast on brains, not just because it's yummy and fun, but because of a certain chemical found in the brain instead. Eddie isn't a big fan of this throughout the comics and often prevents it from happening by giving Venom chocolate instead. In my opinion, that's a really good solution. Offer anybody chocolate instead of anything, they'll probably take it. Because chocolate contained the same chemical, so it worked. It was a nice tasty substitute. Until eventually writers just stopped including the need for human brains for a meal altogether, which is great. Let's just do more of that, less eating brains. And before we head over to number 9, if you guys could go ahead and give us a thumbs up down below, that would be great. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching. Now back to our list. Number 9, pushed Peter Parker. Now when I say he pushed Peter Parker, you might be thinking, okay, well, so what? This guy does backflips off the Empire State Building for fun. So what's a push really gonna do to this guy? Well, this was an issue because Peter Parker's spider sense didn't go off, which he found troubling. It should have went off. It's danger. Why didn't they tell him? Now, do keep in mind, this is before Venom made his big comic book debut in Amazing Spider-Man 300, so his ability to block his spider sense was still a mystery. So Peter luckily saved himself with his reflexes and good Samaritans to help him out off the tracks, but Venom was trying to get rid of Peter long before he was slurping up bad guy brains. Now, the fact that he didn't say anything catchy or announce this big plan, any villain monologue, makes it more realistic and pretty scary. Number 8, Mary Jane trauma. Back in his first comic book appearance in 1988, one of the first things Venom did was introduce himself to Mary Jane in the next issue. In this moment, she can't even remember her name. She knows almost nothing because her mind has been harshly numbed while she's cruelly drowned in this onrushing tide of primal fear. That's what the comic says. That's how they described it. And these emotions may never fully fade away. And it's all thanks to Venom. She's so beyond scared that when Peter walks in with the black suit on, she thinks that it's Venom for a brief second. Venom even says that although it wasn't their target, shaking her up could still work. Yeah, for sure. Let's just terrify some people and ruin their lives just because. Awesome. Therapy not included.
Number 7, transformed Carly Cooper. And not in a good way. While under the mantle of Goblin King, Norman sought information from Carly on the true identity of Superior Spider-Man. He had her kidnapped, and when she refused to give up the information, she refused. He decided to recruit her into his Goblin army. Exposing her to the Goblin formula, he turned Carly into one of his own deranged minions, and for a time she served him under the mantle of Monster. She would eventually be returned to her former self, but this experience would leave its mark, changing Carly forever. Immediately after her recovery, she also cut Peter Parker and Spider-Man out of her life and moved from New York to New Orleans. Though she would come back. She would get over it, but it was still pretty terrible. Number 6, drove Harry insane. I mean, I don't think we can blame Norman for all of Harry's villainous actions, but we can definitely blame him, I think, for most of them. As of late, Harry has resurfaced as the villain known as Kindred, twisted into some combination of Harry's soul combined with that of a demon. This even darker version of Harry blames both Peter and his father for everything that went wrong in his life, and comes back to hold them both accountable and make them pay. I guess you could also look at it in the way that Norman and Peter share the blame here for Harry's psyche cracking. As in loving both of them and then discovering their true identities, it created great conflict in him, causing him to turn on Spider-Man and later also to resent his father and his role as Green Goblin. And kind of his legacy, really, because he also, kind of gets that crazy from his dad, just saying.
Number 5, Zola's creations. When he first came out as Baron Zemo way back, he originally had worked with Arnim Zola, and in Captain America issue 275, he worked with these ugly creations, these monsters. It was so gross. Yeah, he teamed up with Primus and kidnapped Steve Rogers' friend from his childhood in order to lure Steve into a trap. And then in the next issue, Cap was fighting off all these monsters, which was just a mess, and then to add insult to injury, literally, Zemo then revealed that he knew Captain America's true identity. Of course, he's standing all cool too with his squad. So villainy, so villainy. Number 4, he framed Bucky. So a quick trip to an ex-Hydra member's house, Zemo now has some information, and his next step was to frame the Winter Soldier, Bucky Barnes, by using the book, the Winter Soldier book. He framed him so that the world would think that Bucky is the one responsible for an explosion that ended the life of King T'Chaka. Now, all this just happened to go down during the time of the signing of the Accords, of course, so Zemo made it look like Bucky did the whole thing, and then Bucky got arrested and held at the Joint Counter-Terrorist Center building, where he was set to be evaluated by a doctor. Now, the doctor never showed up, but who really showed up was Baron Zemo. He posed as a psychiatrist named Theo Broussard, then he pulls out this handy little Hydra book, he raps off some karate kick keywords, and Bucky is back into punchy mode, leaving quite the mess in the building. Number 3, missile madness. Near the end of World War II, Bucky and Cap were trying to disarm a bomb on a plane, while an attempt to take down none other than Baron Zemo. Now, Steve fell off the wing of the plane, falling into freezing water, where he remained frozen, awaiting his fate as a super soldier out of time. But Bucky, though, a little different than what we saw in the movie. See, Bucky rode the missile out, and then he was thought to have not survived the explosion, but he did. His body also fell into the freezing waters, and just then a Soviet spy submarine just happened to be in the area crossing between the English Channel, so they scooped him up, fixed him up a brand new shiny arm, brainwashed him into becoming this unstoppable assassin. So thanks to Zemo, we got 2 birds in 1 stone, or 1 missile rather. Number 2, the Thunderbolts. So in the time of comics where Onslaught had destroyed the Avengers and the Fantastic Four, Baron Zemo thought that there needs to be a new team out there. So hey, why not rebrand the Masters of Evil to just look like the good guys? Seems pretty easy. They wanted cities to trust them, and after all, who wouldn't trust a group of superpowered beings in tights? Of course we'll trust you. Why not? I mean, we're seeing this being played out in the MCU. People love new Cap. I mean, they did until he turned insane. Just because you have a chin strap doesn't mean that we trust you. Moral of the story. Now, I really hope that he ends up creating the Thunderbolts in the MCU here as well. He clearly has shown us that he can control a large group of superpowered beings, because he does so without them even knowing most of the time. And finally, number 1, he He shot Carly Morgenthau. See, normally when somebody tries to take down a villain, it's a good thing. Like, finally, Flag Smasher, that guy who's breaking all those windows and ruining flag factories, he's done? Sweet, we can finally go back to work. Awesome. Usually it's a good thing when a villain gets taken down. But in Falcon and Winter Soldier, Flag Smasher is a little different than the Flag Smasher in the comics. So Carly Morgenthau and Sam Wilson are talking things out. They're seeing eye to eye. They're just people who have been through hell and back, and they're trying to make sense of this ever-changing world. And then US Agent comes in, acts like a dum-dum, and then Carly takes off thinking that the whole thing was just a setup. And as if it couldn't get any worse, Zemo is waiting around the corner, ready to handle it himself after breaking free of New Cap's handcuffs. He shoots her, and then he continues to shoot her. This guy's insane. Like, way to make things worse for Carly. You could have just danced and let everyone else handle this, but you had to be a jerk. Nice.
Number 10, being named traitor. As awful as this one is, it ranks a little lower on our list because, well, Wanda kind of deserved this one. After the events of House of M, Wanda was seen as one of the biggest mutant traitors around, still being believed at this point to be a mutant. Oddly enough, Scarlet Witch was one of the few prominent mutants in comics who has never been part of the X-Men team, and was really only an Avenger. If you're wondering why that is, a big part of it in the later years has to do with mutants hating her due to the fact that she basically wiped them from existence with her wish of no more mutants, which we now refer to as decimation. Well, that and she was initially too busy serving on her father's villainous team of mutants, the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Still, although she did earn the title traitor, much of what has happened as a result of House of M happened because of basically how harshly people were treating Wanda. So, although she earned the title traitor, it still feels a little harsh to say that she entirely deserved it. I've always thought of Wanda as more of a misguided villain when she plays that role, as opposed to a true and sincere villain in the comics. Number 9. Cast as a villain. To expand on our previous point a bit more, a few of the worst things that have happened to Scarlet Witch usually involve her being cast in some kind of villainous role, despite the fact that she is truly a hero when it all comes down to it. Scarlet Witch only ever wants to do what's best, and usually it's some kind of outward manipulation or force that turns her momentarily evil, or causes her to break down and commit some kind of heinous action. It does make for some pretty interesting stories, but it's pretty awful the number of times and how severely Scarlet Witch has been used in this way by others, and when it comes to storytelling. Number 8, betrayed by her fiancé. Remember when Wanda was about to marry Dr. Doom, and then it was implied that he really only wanted to be with her because he wanted to take her power from her? Granted, it seemed like he also wanted to do so to help her and help the world, but of course, it's still Doom, so you can bet that ego and selfishness were a big part of the reasoning behind this plot as well. Scarlet Witch no longer remembered who she was when her reincarnated son and member of the Young Avengers, Wiccan, came to find her. All she knew was that she loved Victor Von Doom and was ready to marry him, despite the fact that he had kind of manipulated her. Her love was real, but the backstory that she believed she belonged to wasn't. Wanda ended up spurned and mistreated by Doom even after the truth came out, and she still tried to help him. And before we move on to this next point, just a quick reminder to give this video a thumbs up if you are enjoying it. It really does help us out, I promise.
Number 7, more secrets. Marriage is a big deal, as we kind of just mentioned. I mean, maybe in comic books they happen way more often than they should. So many characters get divorced every other day, I swear. Like, divorce lawyers must make millions of dollars in the comics. Holy shit. But the whole point of a proper marriage is to have everything out there on the table, right? You have to know everything about your significant other. No secrets. I mean, sure, if you're Spider-Man, you have to keep some things to yourself, like the fact that you're Spider-Man. Because maybe your friends will go and say something and then the Green Goblin will hear, and then he'll blow up your house or something, or toss your aunt out of a window. I get it. But MJ already knew about Peter Parker being Spider-Man. Of course she did. So right after he had resumed taking on the mantle of the webhead again, he failed to fill in MJ. Yeah, he told her he'd quit, and then he didn't tell her that he was, not quitting anymore. Like, dude, she already knew before. Stop making up lies. What are you, Walter White? It's very obvious you're up to something. Everybody's onto it. Number 6, blackmail for a date. So that One More Day storyline that has been mentioned before on our channel that I'll talk about a little bit more at the end of this list is a pretty pivotal moment in Spider-Man comics. So after this deal had taken place, Spider-Man was now single and ready to mingle. So in Miss Marvel issue 34, we see a new Peter bump into Miss Marvel. And she's in the middle of this sketchy and totally unplanned mission, as Peter puts it, with the CIA. And she can't use her powers, and she's currently on the run from Norman Osborn, who turned S.H.I.E.L.D. into Hammer at this point. It's wild. So bumping into Peter was pretty ideal at this point. He webbed her to safety, all the while they bickered at each other trying to figure out what's going on, what they're up to, what their real intentions are. And then Carol thanks him with a super knee, bam, right between the legs, and then explains to Peter that she needs his help, which is a good order. That's how you do things in that order. I need help. Can you drive me to the airport? If I do this, says Pete, then I want a date with you, which we see come to fruition 13 issues later. So when Carol responded surprised, he even acknowledged that he didn't realize he was gonna say that until it came out. Cool, maybe it just slipped out. But then once she leaves and agrees to it, he's like, yo, I think I just got a date, score. Come on, Pete. A lot of come on Pete's in this, eh? A lot of just what are you doing, dude? Number 5, Latveria. Sometimes you're not the only supervillain who's planning on taking over the world. And when you step on some other villains' toes, well, now we got a problem. Kind of similar to how we tried to be shady with Kingpin. Red Skull once took over for Dr. Doom once he was absent as their ruler of Latveria. Now, Red Skull actually tried to make this land a starting point for his end of the world plan, and when Doom got back, he wasn't pleased with how his country has been led. So much so that he actually used a shrink ray on Red Skull. You can see all this go down in issue 12 of Supervillain Team Up. It's quite fun, nice short read too. Number 4, steal Xavier's brain. Yeah, you heard me correctly. Okay, so when the cloned Red Skull wakes up in modern day, he's still got the urge, of course, to take over the world and turn the population towards mutants. He went under and the world was crazy, and then he came back up and he's like, well, I'm gonna still be crazy. And this guy loves experiments. He's super into the idea of becoming Steve Rogers, and he loves moving consciousness around into computers. And it turns out he also has a thing for stealing brains. Gross. And what other brain to steal other than the best one on the planet, the one belonging to Charles Xavier? This all goes down after the events of Avengers vs. X-Men in Uncanny Avengers issue 1. So Red Skull takes Xavier's brain to help him accomplish this task, this evil master plan. So now he's got telepathic abilities, and he uses this to force humans to attack mutants all around the world. Luckily, that part of Xavier's brain was removed, taking away his telepathic powers, because, you know, we don't want any of that. Red Skull's already bad enough. We don't want to give him that kind of brain. Number 3, Genosha. The Red Skull loves turning places into his own, evidently, and Genosha is just another place on that Schmidt list. Now, I talked about how he stole Xavier's brain, but later on in Uncanny Avengers issue 23, he turns Genosha into this camp, this horrible camp where he abducted numerous mutants and Inhumans. Now, the Avengers luckily escaped their captivity and rescued Magneto, and let's just say he wasn't too pleased about this whole event. The Red Skull had made these evil sidekicks that he referred to as the S-Men. Again, great name, makes absolute sense. And after using the mutant growth hormone to enhance his powers, Magneto wiped out these S-Men and then took out the Red Skull. This all seemed fine and dandy at first, but then this led to another, more powerful persona of Johann, the Red Onslaught. Now, luckily, Scarlet Witch and Dr. Doom casted a spell that allowed Professor X to reawaken in his subconscious and took control of the Red Onslaught long enough for our heroes to take him down. But I mean, anything this guy does, no matter where you go, it just ends up in something worse coming up. It's kind of like how villains work. Number 2, Hail Hydra. This next one resulted in writer Nick Spencer literally getting death threats. Fans were mostly not okay with this one at all. So back in 2016, Captain America said 2 words that would throw every comic book fan for a loop: Hail and Hydra. This all happened in Secret Wars, when Captain America's reality had been rewritten secretly by Kobik, a sentient cosmic cube acting under the influence of said Red Skull. So as a child, Steve was recruited and raised to believe in their ideology, which was, you know, the strong ruling the weak, for the good of all. Now, there's a pleasant nod to this in Avengers Endgame, where the team goes back in time to the first Avengers movie, and then we think Steve is about to lay everybody out in this elevator like he did in Winter Soldier, but a couple well-timed words made him skip the workout and simply walk out of the elevator with the scepter. Honestly, it's one of my favorite moments of Endgame. I mean, when he picks the hammer up, cool, but when he says Hail Hydra, it's just like, it's perfect. And number 1, he made Sharon kill Cap. We go back now to the Civil War comic book event where Captain America was killed by Sharon Carter. Yeah, so Crossbones sniped him. Agent 13, who at the time was also Cap's girlfriend, Sharon, she delivered the finishing bullet from a much closer angle. Well, it turns out it wasn't really Sharon who was doing this work. It was the classic brainwashing that made this defeat happen. And it's all kind of thanks to Dr. Faustus as well. See, this causes a whole chain of events. I mean, for starters, Bucky decides he should kill Iron Man, blaming him for the death of Steve Rogers, and then Falcon also goes after his own lead, and then Tony ended up showing Bucky the letter Cap wrote about how he should be the next Captain America, and Bucky agrees to take the spot, but only if he can operate solo. And to think all this came to a climax after Steve's girlfriend was the one to deliver the fatal blow, it's just heartbreaking. And then when you discover that this is all just a big plan orchestrated by the Red Skull, and you know, things start to make sense. You're like, oh, No.
Number 10, getting his memories back. I mean, this is one of the worst and best things to happen to Bucky when you think about it. He pursued his memories for a long time after losing them to brainwashing, but at the same time, they gave him a pretty huge amount of guilt, as he also remembered everything he had done, the person he used to be, but also the person he was shaped into becoming, against his will. It would often mean that we'd get a very different version of Bucky when he returned as the Winter Soldier after he remembered who he was, a much moodier version than the bright-eyed youngster who had been Captain America's confidant, pal, and sidekick. It would also mean that Bucky would often feel he wasn't worthy of certain tasks, titles, or even friendships, and that it would be hard for him to move forward and see himself as the hero that he could be. The hero he always had been before he was manipulated into being a villain that really he was not. Number 9, died in the snap. Oh, I didn't snap. Can't snap today. This is terrible. Don't give me the gauntlet today. Admittedly, not that bad, as all the heroes who died were returned to us once more when the Avengers finally managed to discover the secrets of time travel, used it to collect the stones, and managed to reassemble a version of the gauntlet, and undid what Thanos had done. But still, dying is never really a good time, I imagine, and all the death we experienced in Infinity War was still very tragic. Also, for a while, we didn't really know if it would end up being reversed. I mean, we hoped, we guessed, we assumed, but it was still unknown as to if it would end up being possible for our heroes to bring everyone back. So of course, Bucky is now back, and after Steve traveled back in time to settle down with Peggy, live his life out with her, and basically ended up retiring, the Winter Soldier returns to the screen to team up on Disney Plus with his partner and Cap's friend besides, Falcon, aka Sam Wilson. Alright friends, before we move on to this next point, if you are enjoying this video and you want to see more videos like it and hear more cool stuff about Winter Soldier, be sure to show us you like it by giving it a thumbs up. Hey! Number 8, the death of his parents. Not only does Bucky have a tragic life following the events of World War II, but even before then, it was pretty sad. When he was only 10 years old, he found himself an orphan. His mother had died earlier on when he was younger, making Bucky not just an older brother to his sister, but also kind of a stand-in parent for her as well, with his father working most of the time to provide for the family. Later on, Bucky would lose his father too, who died in a tragic accident that took place during his basic training with the military. Bucky and his sister would ultimately be split up, and Bucky would end up convincing Camp Lehigh, where his dad had trained, to take him in as a ward of the state, with him going on to become the camp mascot, inspiring and later on even assisting the troops. Number 7, a man out of time. Like Captain America, Bucky is also considered a man out of time. While he was born in 1925, he now lives in the present day, meaning that many of his friends from his days when he was a camp mascot during the war times and pal of Captain America, or if we're talking the MCU serving in the war, are now all dead. Not only that, but like Steve, he's had to adapt to the progress of the modern day, adapting to living in a very different world from the one that he was born into. Granted, this may have been easier for Bucky considering he was at least around, at least periodically, throughout the passing years, and as such has at least seen some of the changes as they've happened. But of course, this timelessness could also be hard for him to adjust to, especially considering how much of the time in his life he spent being controlled by others and not really experiencing the world from his own point of view, but being manipulated by others to see it how they wanted him to see it.
Number 6, lost a fight to Ant-Man. It was a great audition, but it will never happen again. Those are the words Sam Wilson says to Scott Lang when they meet for the second time in Captain America Civil War. The first time they met was when Scott was sent to the New Avengers facility by Hank Pym in the first Ant-Man movie. See, Scott wasn't aware that he was going there, but once he arrived, Sam Wilson was sure aware of his presence. Falcon demanded to know why he was there, and when Ant-Man said he needed to borrow the signal decoy, Falcon just wasn't buying it, and they went at it. And at one point, Sam pulled out guns and shot at Scott. That's how much he thought he was a spy, but Scott won, not by using the higher ground, but by using the smaller one. He shrunk down and got into Sam's jetpack, pulled some plugs, and then Sam fell down to the ground, letting the new Avenger finish his mission. So Sam called into Natasha and made it very clear that Steve never hears about this in the future. Don't worry, Sam, I think all is forgiven at this point. Number 5, arrested. Captain America Civil War is a staple in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The story that begins to unfold in that movie is still being worked out today in the MCU with Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So when Sam Wilson tried to help Steve protect Bucky from Black Panther, it ends with them being arrested. And on top of being arrested, Cap got his shield taken away and Sam's wings were also taken. So when Zemo sneaks into the compound disguised as a psychologist, the power goes out and Sam is left to face off against the Winter Soldier without any of his gear. And it doesn't last too long. In fact, none of the Avengers last too long, but Steve was thankfully able to stop him. The whole Sokovia Accords thing made it very hard for them to suit up and start blowing up the whole building. Now, without his wings, the Falcon couldn't fly and would have to catch a super soldier on feet, regular human feet. Odds are you're not going to succeed. He's actually quite great at being a sleeper agent. And he didn't succeed. Nice try, Sam. Your heart's in the right place at least, so that's cool. Number 4, Marvel Zombies. In Marvel Zombies 3, issue 2, we see Falcon and, well, he's not around for too long, thankfully. I know this sounds weird, but hear me out. So Earth 2149 is a universe I hope to never see with my own eyes because it's terrifying. All of our heroes are zombified, they're zombies. It's gory, it's hopeless, and we're actually gonna get some sort of zombie episode for Disney's What If series coming to Disney+. So maybe we'll see this horrible version of Falcon, but hopefully not, because ooh. So Sam received a call from Nick Fury about this terrible world issue, and at this point heroes and villains have put their past aside because now it's go time. He doesn't last long in human form because when Beast and Reed Richards find a large stash of meat in Latveria, a zombie Falcon swoops in with a horde of other zombies. So Zombie Falcon returned to New York, and then when Machine Man and Jocasta arrived, all these flying zombie supers attacked, Falcon of course being one of them. Now alongside him we also have Beak, Angel, and Vulture. Falcon got a hold of Jocasta's leg, robot leg I might add, and she got payback by blasting his head off with her laser eyes. So not Sam's finest hour, that's for sure. Number 3, Chased War Machine. One of the biggest holy shit moments from Captain America Civil War was when Rhodey went down at the end of the airport battle. This was a moment where the audience wasn't actually sure if he had survived or not, and to this day he's still working out his paralysis. So what happened again? Well, while Ant-Man, well rather Giant Man, distracted the rest of the gang, Captain America and Bucky Barnes had made it to the Quinjet while War Machine and Iron Man were flying behind them trying to get them to stop. So Falcon flew in to help Cap and Buck by launching missiles to distract War Machine, and when Vision shot a laser beam out of the Mind Stone, Falcon quickly reacted by tucking in his wings and free falling out of the way. But that laser had to go somewhere and it went right through Rhodey's arc reactor. So Sam and Tony flew down as fast as they could to try and catch him, but it was no hope as Rhodey slammed into the ground. Falcon begins to apologize to Tony, but Tony doesn't say a word. He instead hits Sam with a repulsor shot. And the next we see of Sam is when he's locked up with the rest of the Avengers who chose the wrong side on the raft. Sad times. Number 2, he quit being Captain America. So back in 2015, Captain America was Sam Wilson. It was a good time, mostly. See, Steve had given him the shield, and then in the second issue of Captain America Sam Wilson, Sam got into it with S.H.I.E.L.D. over some leaked information that had S.H.I.E.L.D. creating its own version of the Cosmic Cube. So Sam wasn't on board with this, so he quit working for the government, and he pulled back to just instead being a friendly neighborhood Captain America. Then S.H.I.E.L.D. went ahead and made this new Cosmic Cube, Kobik, which actually made Steve Rogers young again, and his superpowers were topped off as well. So they both were working as Captain America. Now we have 2. 2 is better than 1. Isn't this glorious? This is so good. Which was great for a while, but come issue 21, the world had viewed Sam in a negative way, so he quit. He was like, yeah, f you guys, I'm out of here. He quit until the Secret Empire storyline concluded, you know, with the real Steve Rogers coming back from the cube after he defeated his evil self, all that jazz. But even afterwards, he returned the shield yet again to let Steve inspire the world himself, which is super similar to what I think is currently happening in the MCU with Falcon and the Winter Soldier, because at the end of episode 1, we meet Number 1, The Replacement. At the end of Falcon and the Winter Soldier episode 1, right before the credits, we see a pretty shocking announcement. We see the government announce a new symbol of hope, a new Captain America. And there he is, wearing the same suit, rocking the same shield, not Falcon. But instead a new guy, this guy named US Agent. Wyatt Russell is playing this character in the MCU. His name is John Walker, and the character first came into comics with Captain America issue 323. He actually started off opposed to Captain America. He was one of those guys who stage fights, made himself look better, and then he took on the alias Super Patriot, and then finally he went to the new Captain America. This guy isn't the most gentle in the comics, so it may seem like a good choice for the government and how the current state of the world post-blip is, it might get quite ugly. Kicking off the list at number 10, we have the Power Broker. John Walker looked up to his older brother Michael quite a bit, especially after he sacrificed his life serving during the Vietnam War. So John decided to follow in his brother's footsteps, and he went into the military service as well. but that still wasn't enough. John felt like he still wasn't the hero that he needed to be. He kept comparing himself to Michael, and what exactly is a hero without a few super abilities on the side, am I right? So he paid a visit to the Power Broker. The Power Broker is being teased throughout Falcon and Winter Soldier right now, but what do? Who are they? Well, they trade their knowledge of technology for high-paying customers who want to undergo this risky process to basically become a superhero. It's like a gamble to get some powers. Half the time, the clients wouldn't even survive. See, it's not that easy to become a superhero. But it worked for John Walker. Unfortunately, it enhanced his strength a hefty amount. So now we have the motivation, we have the superpowers. So what's the next step? And before we continue on with this list, guys, if you want to go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, that would be great. You guys are super helpful. Thank you so much for your support. Now let's fly right back into this list. Number 9, he became Super Patriot. Before becoming Captain America, John Walker tried the hero gig, just in another fashion. First, he was the Super Patriot. He made a spectacular first appearance in Captain America 323, and John Walker was standing up for America and its true ideals. Nice. He even chose July 4th to make his grand entrance. What a patriot. What a super patriot. So Cap walks by as this is happening when he's making his big debut, and he sees a big poster with his face on it with a big red X through the center. It's kind of like America's Got Talent. And then on the other side, we see the super patriot with a big yes on his side. Okay, that's odd. So now he's starting to publicly shame Captain America in front of his supporters. He's trying to win over the crowd. And if a cool America monologue wasn't enough to do it, he had his own buck, the Bold Urban Commandos. There were 3 of them, and they staged attacks to make John Walker look better. But you could only look so good until number 8. He fought Captain America. So where John and his 3 Bold Urban Commandos staged another attack, Captain America arrived to save the day. And then readers get treated to a star-spangled battle. And John puts up a pretty good fight as well. He can actually go toe-to-toe with Captain America. Thanks, Power Broker. It worked. They end up battling it out for 27 minutes straight. 27 minutes. That's like a full TV episode of just getting punched in the face. That's terrible. But Super Patriot was never able to really land a blow on Cap, and Cap was never able to keep Super Patriot down. So they're just standing there out of breath for 27 minutes like, now what? So Super Patriot leaves before doing the worst thing ever in all of this. He calls Steve a loser, and then he runs away. Number 7, no rules. Captain America 332, the villain Warhead drops in via parachute with a message. Make war some more. Signed, Warhead. You know, in case we confused him with somebody else falling from the skies. He set up a table on top of the Washington Monument, and then he pulled out a nuclear device. So it's not looking like a good situation at all. Perfect time for a hero like Super Patriot. Yeah, he came in and used his powers and saved the day, proving that he can indeed be worthy of the hero life. Well, he tried to, but it didn't go as well as he planned. He climbed up the side, up to Warhead and his well-balanced table, and then he started hucking throwing stars at him at first. He hit him in the face a couple times. And then when that didn't work and he was close enough, he just grabbed the table and threw it into a diving board of doom and just hucked this guy right off into the skies. And he did not survive the fall at all. I mean, you could have handled this in literally any other way. You have superpowers. Come on, use your head.
Number 6, from the Torch to Wonder Man. The first Human Torch was not actually Johnny Storm, but was an android created by Professor Phineas Horton himself. Ultron, wanting to make his own such creation, kidnapped the professor and forced him to build an android being for Ultron's own purposes, which we talked about a little bit earlier. The professor, of course, modeled the synthezoid after his own creation, but a little too closely for Ultron's liking, as I said, bestowing the Human Torch's memories as well to the creation we'd later come to know as Vision. Brought to life, this being attacked Ultron, who had killed the professor as punishment for his betrayal. Unfortunately, Torch Vision, this version of Vision, was no match for Ultron, and in the end he actually ended up being reprogrammed by Ultron to follow his orders and was given the brain patterns of Wonder Man. Nothing against Wonder Man, by the way, but sharing brain patterns with that hero would cause lots of weirdness for Vision and for Scarlet Witch as well later on down the line. I feel like if you get to pick who you want to share brain patterns with, Wonder Man's not at the top of the list. Also, it's really weird that like Wonder Man's brain patterns were just lying around Hank Pym's lab in like a little recorder device. It's like, why did you have those, Hank Pym? What's going on? Number 5, no one to help. This point has some more specific spoilers for the latest episode of WandaVision, episode 6. So if you haven't gotten there yet, you maybe want to skip this one if you want to avoid spoilers, or if you haven't seen it but you're like, I'm living through the spoilers, man, which is fine. In the latest episode of WandaVision, it's Halloween in Westview as we proceed along our sitcom timeline into the world of basically kind of a Malcolm in the Middle inspired era, which aired actually in the 2000s, despite this episode having a very 90s feel, and despite that series having a 90s feel. Trying to solve the mystery of what's really going on in Westview, Vision lies to Wanda about not being able to join her and the kids trick-or-treating, due to being on duty for Neighborhood Watch. Now, in reality, he actually spends the evening investigating Westview and eventually finds the town's reality warping barrier, which he attempts to cross, not knowing that this will likely end up killing him. As outside of this altered reality, which it's hinted at is numbered as 2800 in the MCU, despite the fact that I think that number's already taken in the comics, Vision is in fact dead. When he moves to leave the town, we watch as he struggles against the magical barrier, which obviously very much wants to keep him within town limits. Sword watches as he attempts to move into their world, seeing him fall to pieces, slowly dissolving in front of them. And as a handcuffed Darcy Lewis shouts for them to do something, like help this man. But that doesn't end up happening. They just run. In the end, it's up to Wanda to save the day when Billy alerts her that he senses that his dad is in danger. Wiccan to the rescue. Number 4, manipulated into being a villain. I really do feel for Vision. Most of the most terrible things that have happened to him in the comics or otherwise are honestly my worst nightmare, which is being controlled by other people. In this case, we're talking about when he was sent in to kill the Avengers and seemingly in some kind of murderous trance. Once the team attempted to reason with him, it became apparent that this synthozoid enemy wasn't all he appeared to be, and in fact that he might not truly be acting of his own volition. In the end, Vision would end up becoming an ally to the Avengers, fighting against his instincts to do them harm. They'd actually help him by deprogramming his murderous urges, and he would eventually go on to join the Avengers outright, fighting many times against his creator and father, Ultron. Many times. Many times. Ultron never stays dead. Number 3, infected with a Hydra virus. During the events of Secret Empire, Steve Rogers would end up having his whole life history rewritten and be revealed as a long-time sleeper agent for Hydra. Our heroes would, however, find out too late about Rogers' true allegiances, and so Captain America would become Captain Hydra, or Hydra Supreme, and would take over the United States of America for the glory of Hydra. But he would also end up recruiting some of Earth's mightiest heroes besides, including Scarlet Witch and Vision. But how did he convince them to join the side of evil? Well, he didn't. For Wanda, Hydra actually awoke Chthon within her in order to take control of her body and make use of her powers. And if you want to learn more about Chthon and that whole thing, you can check out the worst things that happened to Wanda's list, where we talk about that a bit more. For Vision, being a synthezoid, they merely infected him with a virus. That was easy. And although Vision tried to fight it, he remained unable to break free and fight against Hydra until near the end of the event. Like the second last issue, I believe, in the main one. Secret Empire number 9. Number 2, death. While those who only knew Vision from the MCU might think of his tear-jerking demise in Endgame, comic fans know that a fate worse than being destroyed, at least the first time around, awaited him in the comics. Here, instead of Wanda destroying him at his own request, urging her on with words of affirmation and love, Vision ends up being controlled against his will by her, which leads to him ending up in a direct conflict that he doesn't actually want any part of, which ultimately leads to his very gruesome death. Not only does he melt and vomit up silver pods, which transform into Ultron bots, but overkill comes into play when She-Hulk then decides to go into a rage and ends up tearing him down the middle, which is a pretty epic and permanent kind of on-panel death. Although, of course, even if you get ripped down the middle, that's probably not the end of you, because comics. Vision is still a synthetic being, and he can be recreated. So don't worry, he would be rebuilt, and he would return once more. But what a death to come back from. Number 1, weaponized. During the events of Avengers Disassembled, which led right into House of M, Wanda ended up suffering from a mental break, and as such ended up turning on her fellow Avengers. You'd think Vision, being one of the Avengers who, is married to Wanda, would be safe, but no. Wanda ended up not only getting him killed, but it was the way in which she did it, I think, that just really cut him deep. She didn't just put him in the right places to be torn apart by She-Hulk, but she actually turned him into into a weapon to be used against his friends and teammates, the Avengers. Vision actually warned them when he came to them that he was no longer in control of his body before vomiting up those pods, which turned into Ultron robot drones, who then attacked the Avengers after their mansion had already been attacked. This was just a real bad day all around for the whole team. When Vision returned to life and Wanda much later came to ask for forgiveness, it would actually be this memory that would prevent him from being able to forgive his wife, Scarlet Witch. He was like, I can forgive the fact that you had a mental break, but you literally turned me against my friends and made me like hurt them, and some of them died. It's like pretty crazy.
Kicking off the list at number 10. The Phoenix. Baron Zemo's whole thing is following in your father's footsteps. I mean, sure, sometimes it's not hard if your father's not a supervillain, but when Baron Zemo was dealing with the passing of his father, he was an engineer at the time and he was quite smart. Add that in with a little bit of grudge towards Captain America and bam, you get very, very desperate. He became this new persona and called himself Phoenix, but this resulted in him just getting whooped, but this time he got whooped in a cool costume. Luckily, Sam Wilson came into the rescue and Phoenix, fell into a vat of adhesive X and it changed his appearance forever. Sometimes you start out as a different hero, fall into some acid, and then you're like, you know what? I'm gonna wear a mask. I think I'm gonna wear a mask forever. Guys, before we go on to this list of not so great times of Baron Zemo, if you wanna go ahead and give this video a like, that would be great. It really does help us out a lot here in our studio. Thank you so much, you guys are the best. Thanks for supporting. Now let's get right back into this list. Number 9, put on the mask. Okay, so he fell into adhesive X and now he needs a cool mask. Every cool supervillain needs a cool mask, even if you can't understand what they're saying half the time. In episode 3 of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Zemo finds a purple mask alongside other family goods. It's like a supervillain garage sale. There's a car, there's some outfits, some cool weapons, but what's the story behind this mask? Why did he give it such the long look? Why is he so coy with it? Well, in the comics, Zemo's father, Heinrich Zemo, the OG Baron Zemo, had a mask permanently stuck to his face after he messed around with adhesive X. So after Heinrich passed, he figured he'd continue on with this mask tradition, but thankfully he didn't super glue it to his own face or anything horrible like that, because that would be just, I wouldn't want to see that in the show at all. Not at all. Well, maybe a little bit. No, not at all. While it's fun to see a comic accurate setup for Baron Zemo, I get the feeling his villain roots have only just been planted. Number 8, Masters of Evil. Every supervillain needs a super squad, and this idea was called the Masters of Evil. They came to life in the comics in Avengers issue 273. Zemo was still trying to get that sweet, sweet revenge on Captain America, but he was outmanned. So he's already copying his dad enough, he might as well bring back his dad's idea of a super crew. Let's do it. His own personal team of supervillains, and they weren't too shabby off the bat either. Just 2 issues later, the Masters of Evil took on the Avengers and gave them a run for their money. Number 7, the Sad Dad Reunion. This next one takes place from Captain America issue 357 to issue 362. The distance one will go for family, especially Baron Zemo. It can be pretty overwhelming, especially when he tries to bring his father back to life. Yeah, that happened. With the help of Batroc's brigade, a team of mercenaries led by Batroc the Leaper, Zemo used the Bloodstone to resurrect his father, but the conversation that followed wasn't exactly hopeful. You know how like in Avengers Endgame, where Tony Stark goes back in time and he has that one last conversation with his dad, and it helps him get the strength and courage to actually sacrifice himself by the end of the film? It closes his loop, it closes his character arc. This doesn't happen at all. He brought his father back to find out, well, that his father was actually nothing but disappointed in Baron. This is a fun 6-parter, but man, I can't help but feel bad for Baron. Villain or not, sometimes it's best just to let dead things lay.
Number 6, Death of Captain America. The supposed death. Anyways, Steve would later of course return, but yes, at the time, people thought that Steve Rogers was dead. After he was shot through what looked to be the neck, yikes, and then later the gut, and yeah, anyways, he's fine, it's all fine. Bucky himself was initially believed to be the culprit, even by Falcon, and the two had a quick scuffle before Bucky explained he'd rather take his own life first before allowing himself to ever harm Steve. Aww. Bucky also then revealed that he was talking to the Nick Fury on comms and was only in the building that the sniper had sniped from because he was attempting to apprehend the person responsible, which then led to Falcon and Bucky teaming up to do so.
Number 5. William Burnside. William Burnside, who had changed his name to Steve Rogers and even got work done on his face to match the look. He ended up developing another Captain America serum, and he and his buddy Jack tried to be the new Bucky and Cap. So they got enhanced abilities and they took down Red Skull. They did some pretty good work as a team. The only thing was, a year later, things started to go a little bit south. They started to become paranoid schizophrenics, so the government put them in cryogenic suspension. He went from being Captain America to being the villain, just like that. So William and his Bucky Barnes sidekick, Jack Monroe, both were in custody of Dr. Faustus, who brainwashed William to become the Grand Director, the leader of the hate group called the National Force. Number 4. 404. Cap not found. In Captain America issue 404, we see Steve Rogers squaring up against werewolves. Yeah, what a sight to see. You heard me correctly. I said werewolves. The story known as Children of the Night runs from issue 403 to 405. And during this time, Captain America is fighting off Starksboro werewolves, and then when Nightshade tries to inject Wolverine with her wolf serum, his healing factor keeps counteracting him. So Druid mesmerized him with serums too. Then the next issue, we see front and center Cap Wolf. Pretty hard to forget. So now he's a werewolf and he has faint memories of Steve Rogers. So, of course, as you would expect, it's a pretty messy good time. Number 3, Civil War. Captain America Civil War was released in 2016, directed by the Russo brothers, and the whole movie, like the comic, is superhero politics. If you're a superhero, you have to register. You can't just be out filming yourself doing super TikToks and then you end up accidentally exploding a school. It's just not gonna fly anymore. And in the movie, it's Wanda Maximoff who kickstarts the Sokovia Accords, forcing Tony to side with the government as he feels responsible for Charles Spencer, among many others' deaths. You know, with all the events that unfolded with the Age of Ultron stuff. So Steve wants to protect Bucky this whole time, and of course, freedom throughout the team is encouraged. Now, eventually, due to Baron Zemo's work, he gets Tony in the same room as Steve, and we see footage of a brainwashed Bucky kill Tony's parents. The next 10 minutes are filled with Steve having to fight off Tony in order to save his best friend. And it's truly heartbreaking, and it all ends with Steve sticking the shield in Tony's chest, and as he carries away a broken down Winter Soldier, Tony says to him the shield does not belong to him, it belongs to his father. And that's the last time he sees the shield and Tony Stark, so it all goes downhill for Cap for quite a while after this point. Number 2, Stuck in Dimension Z. In the comic storyline Castaway in Dimension Z, Captain America ends up getting stuck in this land created by Arnim Zola, and he's in there for 12 years. That's some Black Mirror type torture. That's like crazy. So during the 12 years, Steve raised a boy named Ian, who's a kid he rescued from Zola as his own. So the whole thing is that Steve has to return to Earth soon before this implant on his torso that's combined with the virus of Zola's consciousness takes over his mind. Not a great scenario. Also, ouch, that doesn't look too comfortable of a procedure. It's one of the more brutal body injuries, and of course the whole being trapped for 12 years element, I mean, that just adds to this already horrible nightmare. And finally, number 1, shot by Sharon Carter. We go back now to the Civil War comic book event where Captain America was killed by his girlfriend Sharon Carter. Yeah, so after Crossbones sniped him, Agent 13, who at the time was Cap's girlfriend, delivered the final bullet from a much closer range. Well, it turns out it wasn't Sharon who was doing the work, really. The classic brainwashing made this defeat happen. Dr. Faustus. Okay, this causes a whole chain of events. I mean, for starters, Bucky decides he should then kill Iron Man after this, blaming him for the death of Steve Rogers. And then also Falcon ends up going after his own lead, he just leaves. And now Tony ended up showing Bucky the letter Cap wrote about how he should be the next Captain America. And Bucky agrees to take the spot only if he can operate solo. No government, no big brother watching, just let me do my job, move out of the way, you guys suck. To think all this came to a climax after Steve's girlfriend was the one to deliver that final blow just adds insult to injury.
Number 10, Stan Lee's ire. Initially, Vision wasn't loved by all at Marvel's offices. In fact, Marvel legend Stan Lee hated the look and the name of the character apparently when he was first created in 1968 by John Buscema and Roy Thomas. Apparently, Stan complained to Roy about the choice of color for the android, not liking the look of his bright red appearance, and also felt the name was not a good fit, not strong enough for the character. Today, his appearance has become iconic, and we think nothing of it. But back when he was first created, it wasn't just with comic book characters that his existence was considered controversial. Number 9. Death of his first creator. Despite the fact that we often attribute Vision's existence to Ultron, he wasn't the only one involved in his creation process. And no, I'm not talking about Tony Stark here. Professor Phineas Horton was forcefully recruited by Ultron into helping him create the synthezoid we later came to know as the Vision. Vision, in fact, was originally given the memories of Professor Horton's previous android creation, which brought on the rage of Ultron, who had specifically told Horton to wipe those memories. He's like, you do it or you're dead. And Horton was like, we'll see. Ultron, of course, did kill the professor, though, creating probably one of the first tragic moments in Vision's life to come about. At the time, the Synthezoid mourned the life of his creator and swore to get revenge on Ultron. And before we move on to this next spot, just a quick reminder, if you are enjoying this video and you want more like it, talking about Wanda or Vision or both of them together, oh, romantic moments, be sure to give this video a thumbs up. It really does help us out on the channel. Number 8, no sense of normalcy. Despite the fact that he might seem cold and seems to embrace his synthetic nature, Vision actually constantly strives to fit in. When Wanda and Vision first got married in the comics, they both sought to find normalcy together by settling down in a suburban neighborhood. Oh, it's so nice. Similar to what we've seen the couple attempts in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in the Disney Plus show WandaVision. Yeah, if you like WandaVision and you want to sort of read more things that maybe have inspired it, this is a miniseries you're going to want to read. The two of them, however, it seems were never fated to have a normal life, and try as they might, strange events always seemed to disrupt their attempts and lurk around every single corner. For an example of what I'm talking about, you need not look further than the first issue of their miniseries together from the 80s, The Vision and Scarlet Witch. Seriously though, check out this miniseries. On Halloween, a quiet night in quickly turns into something out of a nightmare, ending with a visit from Scarlet Witch's often villainous then-father, Magneto. So it becomes more of a nightmare, I imagine. Number 7, being controlled. The smallest spoilers ahead for WandaVision if you know nothing about it, but mostly this part is pretty safe as we'll just be focusing kind of on the premise of the show and what we know of it so far based on what has been implied in the episodes. So it's more of like a, if you know the show, you probably know this. In WandaVision, it's implied that Scarlet Witch, Wanda herself, is in complete control of everything going on in Westview, including Vision's appearance and existence there. After all, as we talked about before, Vision's appearance there likely means that Wanda manipulated him and brought him back to life, possibly even reanimating his lifeless corpse. Yikes. As the show unfolds, Vision becomes more suspicious of his life in Westview and Wanda and her involvement not just in it, but in manipulating it as well with her reality-altering powers. Also, I never noticed this before, but Westview's name actually seems to be a reference to the initial of the main characters of the show and the show title itself. Westview, WV. WandaVision, WV. Interesting. Also, it's weird that it took me so long to notice that, but I just noticed it today, so I was looking for all kinds of other explanations as to what Westview meant. I never thought about, like, the initials.
Number 6, William Naslund. He was originally introduced in the comics as the Spirit of 76 in Invaders issue 14. William Naslund also held Captain America's mantle for a brief moment. This what-if comic turned out to be canon, so back after the apparent death of Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes at the end of World War II, the United States approached him to be the new Captain America. The first replacement. Wow, how exciting would that be? So much pressure though. So he had the shield for a brief amount of time. He had done a couple of missions and then he died in action. Yeah, he had to fight off these robots and he ended up in the hands of one of them and was crushed to death. But he went down a hero. He activated a flare device that made the robot inactive, and he also summoned the other members of the All Winners to come to the rescue. So he went out a hero, short but sweet.
Number 5, truce? Question mark? So at some point, it's fair to make a truce, okay? Maybe the conflicts just don't have realistic expectations, and then both parties are like, you know what, this has gone on way too long, let's just call it, no hard feelings. Bam. Like Spider-Man 3, when Pete and Harry teamed up to save the day against Venom and Sandman. That was a great moment. Moviegoers were thrilled to see the end of Bad Boy James Franco and Bad Boy Tobey Maguire. Like, just stop dancing and snapping at people. Just fight. I don't know. But in the comics, he made a pretty questionable truce with Venom. And it all happens in The Amazing Spider-Man 375. Spider-Man's parents get kidnapped by Venom. So he's like, no problem. I'll just roll up with your ex-wife. What's up? Let's make a deal. What do you got? So Spider-Man saved her life, so in return, a truce was to be made. I mean, sure, this was the kickoff to Venom becoming an anti-hero, and then he can have his own run, but also, it's Venom, you know?
Christineth, are you stupid or are you deaf?
Number 4, the fairy incident. Spider-Man Homecoming. Okay, so after intimidating Aaron Davis with his cool, deep voice, Spider-Man figured out the next move for the arms dealers. So Pete decides to take matters into his own hands and prove that he's worthy of being a suitable Avenger. See, this was right after Tony recruited him to help take down Team Cap in Civil War. So he was warm, he got a taste of the action, and now he wants to do more. That's fair, that's why we love Spider-Man. So the Staten Island ferry was the next location for the Vulture's arms deal to go down. Let's do it. We got the intel, we're rolling in. So he says some quips, webs a few bad guys up, but the Vulture's Chitauri weapon was just too much for Peter to handle, resulting in the ferry to split in half. Right down the middle too, not even like Titanic. So in a last attempt to keep the civilians safe, he tries to hold on to both sides, which is a sick moment. It's kind of like a homage to other Spider-Man moments. It's great, but people are in danger. People are about to drown. There's like cars that are sinking. It's bad. And thankfully, with Iron Man's surprise arrival, the passengers were saved. Tony was pissed though. He had this whole setup, there was an inside operation, and then Spidey came in and blew it. And he didn't even tell Tony about what he was doing to make matters all the worse, which resulted in Tony taking back the Spider-Man suit. It's always the worst part, right after a breakup. You're like, fine, here's your nice sweater. God, I'm so cold now. Number 3, evil assassin Spider-Man. We go now to Earth 8351, where Spider-Man and Wolverine are training together in Alaska. Nice and cold. So they're trying to go rogue, so they're working on becoming stronger, and they're training, they're having a good time. Now, this Peter Parker, he's a bit more rough around the edges. Even his famous catchphrase is now slightly different. See, in this universe, it is, with great power comes great responsibility and greater enemies, which I like more. It's honest, it's definitely better. Doesn't roll off the tongue, but it's a step in the right direction. And it makes sense why he's going rogue. He's truly trying to protect his friends and family, and saying those few extra words at the end just reaffirms his only goal. So when they're attacked, Spider-Man tells Wolverine just to keep hitting people while he deals with a bad guy wielding not one, but 2 swords. So Spider-Man tries webbing him up, and the swords don't allow that. And Spider-Man even gets laughed at for attempting to do this. And Spider-Man says, you're right, that's not gonna work. Bam, shoots him in the face. Huh? They held off long enough until S.H.I.E.L.D. arrived. I mean, sure, this Spider-Man is a different version, but it's still Spider-Man, right? Like, regardless of the title on the front page, this is a moment most fans remembered long after the pages were closed. He like did a cool peace sign too, and then the bullets popped out of his wrist. It was cool. He's like, hey, smell this, bam. Smell this, why the fuck would he say that? Number 2, hit Mary Jane. Spectacular Spider-Man issue 226, we see Ben Reilly and Peter Parker, and the tension is high. They're trying to prove who the real Spider-Man is. It's during all the clone stuff. And they reach a conclusion that Ben Reilly is in fact the real Spider-Man. He is the real father. He is the father. Peter doesn't respond to this well at all. He's upset, obviously. He's watching his entire life basically get stolen in front of him. And then MJ tries to get in the middle, and cool everything down, and Peter instinctively just brushes her off, yelling to leave him alone. Now, you can't really brush somebody off of you when you can lift, I don't know, a bus. He's strong, he's really strong. So him just doing that in a matter of rage, she went flying. And to make matters somehow worse, she was pregnant. Yeah, she was pregnant. And he quickly knew he had messed up, saying, oh God, what have I done? What kind of man am I? I'll tell you what kind of man you are, Spider-Man. You're a guy who gets on a lot of lists of people getting in trouble. That's what you are. Kidding, you're a gem. Stop hitting people. And finally, number 1, the deal with the devil. I mentioned this earlier, now it's time to get into it. Look, sometimes Peter will try and do the right thing. Well, most of the time he'll do the right thing. But then life just gets even harder for him after that. And then he's presented with a new issue to face, and it's like an over and over again thing. It's just a nightmare. And then in 2007, starting with the Amazing Spider-Man issue 544, the storyline One More Day, it's exactly what might happen if you revealed your identity to the public. Following in the footsteps of Tony Stark in the Civil War II storyline, where Peter revealed his true identity in order to support the Superhero Registration Act. So giving out your last name to supervillains, cool, great idea, awesome, nothing bad's gonna happen at all. This of course resulted in Aunt May getting shot, and in order to save her life, he must make a deal with the devil, literally Mephisto. And in doing so, the world will also forget about Peter's true identity. Not a bad deal. The only catch is that Mephisto takes away the marriage of Peter and Mary Jane. And I don't mean a quickie divorce and he's like, hey, sign here, poof. No, I mean it never happened. The relationship is gone, and at the turn of a page, the marriage was just no more. All those memories, all those moments, Gone just like that.
Number 10 was creeped upon. Hardcore creeped upon. During Spectacular Spider-Man, there were a few issues where Mary Jane was feeling particularly lonely, and Jason Jerome, an actor she had worked with, saw an opportunity to try and seduce her. Also, Jason Jerome just sounds like the most jerky name ever. If you ever meet someone named Jason Jerome, I feel like you should be warned. Something weird might happen. Also, sorry if your name is Jason Jerome, I'm sure you're a lovely person. Jason insisted he knew how she felt and that she wanted him just as badly as he wanted her. She definitely felt something, but after every move he put on her, she would insist that she loved her husband Peter Parker and wasn't interested, despite her feeling somewhat tempted due to Peter's long absences. In the end, however, she finally told him off by inviting him over, only to toss the bottle of wine that he'd brought with him back at him, causing it to shatter and spill, ruining his pants. Also, I don't know about you, but I've never thrown a bottle of wine so hard that it shattered, especially if it hit a person. I don't know if Jason Jerome is just made of something really hard or what's going on there. I also love that Mary Jane and Peter have a poster of Peter's face by their door, which is really strange. Like a full on, and she's like, this picture of me and Peter. Not creepy at all. Mary Jane had to put up with a lot of Jason being creepy for multiple issues and even at times appearing to stalk her. Ew. Number 9, used as a human shield. Even when Mary Jane first met Spider-Man, she was smitten with him, even though it was under pretty terrifying circumstances. During one of the first times that Spider-Man ever saved Mary Jane, she was out go-go dancing at a club, hired to dance up on stage and take pictures of the patrons at their tables in between. Suddenly, an attack broke out, featuring goons armed with guns. One of them even manages to take Mary Jane hostage briefly, using her as a human shield. Fortunately, he and his gun are no match for Spider-Man, who thwip clogs up the barrel with his webbing. Spider-Man saves the day and saves Mary Jane. She seems too enamored with Spider-Man to even react to what just happened, but being held at gunpoint and used as a human shield in the middle of a fight has to be traumatizing. However, this wouldn't be Mary Jane's first brush with danger, nor would it be her last. Before we move on to this next point, just a quick reminder to give this video a thumbs up if you are enjoying it, and if you want more videos like this, or more videos about Mary Jane, because Mary Jane's awesome. Number 8, got blown up. In one of the most recent issues of Amazing Spider-Man, spoiler alert, skip this point if you don't want me to spoil things. Mary Jane gets blown the heck up by one of Green Goblin's pumpkin bombs. That's right, Green Goblin is back, baby. But of course, the awful part is that Mary Jane is about to end up in the middle of the crossfire after joining Harry Osborn and Peter in a dank crypt for a horrific dinner party. I guess I should say like demon Harry Osborn, because he's like part demon, part I don't know what's really fully going on there. It's complex. Mary Jane ends up being pretty much targeted in the explosion after trying to sacrifice herself to save Peter. Ain't that just the way? But somehow, miraculously, she survives at least. It's later revealed what MJ's fate is, but I won't spoil the latest issue for those who haven't gotten to read it yet. Regardless, this one explosive panel was pretty brutal to look at as a fan of Mary Jane. Number 7, betrayed by her lover. For a guy who loves her, Scott sure has a funny way of showing it during Avengers vs. X-Men. Granted, he was not himself here as he was possessed by the Phoenix Force, but it still really sucked. Also, Emma was possessed by the Phoenix Force at the same time, so I feel like he doesn't get that as an excuse for this one. Emma and Scott were the last of the Phoenix Five to be left standing, wielding the immense power of the Phoenix Force. But while Emma was still relatively doing okay and kind of holding her own with all this power, Cyclops had his mind corrupted and was starting to turn dark. Driven mad by the influence of Dark Phoenix, Scott turned on Emma, taking all her power for himself so that he had enough power to do what he believed needed to be done. And then he used that power to kill Professor X, who tried to stop him. Although I don't think Emma would have minded this part terribly, as she kinda does tend to blame Charles for messing Scott up, so she'd probably be like, well, that's what you get for messing Scott up as a kid, which is evident later as well when she telepathically kicks Charles's butt, and I love that fight. X-Men Legacy, so good! Number 6, assassinated. This was revealed to have happened at the very end of issue 139 of New X-Men. Emma was shot while in her diamond form with a diamond bullet strong enough to basically shatter her. The horrifying thing was that while not physically alive, her consciousness actually still resided and was essentially trapped within her shards. After an investigation and Emma being returned to life by the efforts of Beast and Jean Grey, it was revealed that Esme, one of Emma's cuckoos, was the one who was to blame. Esme, being one of Emma's students, made this a painful revelation, but it also likely would have been horrifying to be reduced to just bits of consciousness trapped in shards, and then be reassembled by Jean's Phoenix Force fire. This whole thing sounds pretty terrible to me. Number 5. Jean Grey broke her. When it comes to the rivalry between Emma and Jean, it's something that has always been there. Even now in Krakoa, when everyone is evolving and moving forward, there is still that spark of competition between the two women, even though now it's at least more of a respectful one than one of pure hatred or distaste. Back when Emma, however, had a psychic affair with Scott, who is Jean's husband at the time, the two were literally like fire and ice with one another, complete opposites and true enemies. The revelation that Emma and Scott were having an affair behind Jean's back caused Jean to completely go off the handle. She brutally, telepathically attacked Emma while trying to get to the bottom of what happened between her and Scott in Hong Kong, making her relive some of her worst traumas to mentally torture Emma, and in the end leaving her broken. Emma was left seeing herself as shallow, spiteful, and manipulative, believing, like Jean, that she was completely in the wrong and losing her sense of confidence and her own high self-esteem. Messing with Jean's relationship left Emma not just burned by her fire, but scorched. In other words, you don't want to mess with Jean Grey. Don't do it. Number 4. Mr. Kendall. Let's talk about the whole teacher-student thing that went on with Emma Frost and Ian Kendall, Emma's teacher. This whole thing is just pretty awful, and also Ian was irresponsible and in the end also terribly judgmental of Emma and broke her heart, which honestly doesn't even make this whole situation much worse because it was already just so awful to begin with. Ugh. As though Emma didn't already have enough on her plate being a villain turned hero in the comics, writers felt that they needed to make Emma even more complex in her own series, Emma Frost, from the early 2000s. So Emma developed a weird romantic relationship with her teacher. She appeared to be the instigator here, but this also seems to be used as a way to kind of like give Mr. Kendall a scapegoat in the end. Like he's like, oh, I didn't want to be attracted to her, but I couldn't help myself. And he's like, you know, I really don't want this, but Emma really wants this. And I'm like, oh my goodness, what's happening here? Emma was like no student, no woman he'd ever known. That's actually something that is said in the series. Oh my goodness. The romance initially was stopped by Emma's father, Winston, when Emma was in high school, but would later resume when Emma ran into Ian again when she was attending university and was no longer his student. In the end, he rejected her not because their whole relationship was wrong, but because she was a filthy and in his mind dishonest mutant. So that's how that ended. Feel like it should have ended like, actually this is wrong, the end. But no. Number 3. Attack on her school. As Emma became more of a teacher in the comics, she at one point got a school of her own. She ran the school alongside Banshee Sean Cassidy. Her school not only contained mutants, but at one point also operated as a school for non-powered children as well. Emma did her best to keep the peace and, for the most part, was pretty successful until her sister Adrienne showed up and rocked her world. Adrienne had her own plans for Emma and the school. She terrorized both students and her sister when she planted bombs in the school and threatened to blow everyone sky high, attempting to murder many of the students there. Emma managed to fight off Adrienne while students Sink and Banshee handled the bombs, but in the end it cost Sink his life. He sacrificed himself to save human students when the last bomb couldn't be stopped, which also meant part of the school was blown apart as well. Number 2. Punished for having powers. When Emma's parents found out she had powers, rather than accept their daughter or even run in fear of her, they refused to acknowledge that any of it was truly real and decided instead to deal with the problem as if it were any other problem that children from wealthy families such as Emma's suffered. They decided to send Emma to an asylum, but not one really bent on rehabilitating its patients. Her parents referred to it as the clinic. There Emma was doped up and sedated, and it was also implied that the guards took advantage of her vulnerability as well while she was there. Eventually, Emma found a way to reach into the minds of her captors there and was able to manipulate them into helping her escape. Number 1. Her team was killed. If there is anything that Emma cherishes and loves the most, it is her students. There is nothing she wouldn't do to protect them, and honestly, in any reality where Emma has become a mother, we've seen just how fiercely loyal and protective she can be when it comes to her own children. The same sentiment in the main continuity generally extends to those that she teaches. So one of the worst things that can ever happen to her, and has ever happened to her, is to see those who put faith in her, those who she helped to grow and teach, killed. That's exactly what happened when her students got caught up in a battle involving Sentinels that were teleported right into the middle of a mutant party, which both the Hellions and Emma happened to be at. Emma was left in a coma in the aftermath, and pretty much all of her Hellions were left dead. And also, remember when I was talking about how Jean mentally tortured her? A lot of what Jean tried to use for that was just basically any experiences where Emma had lost students. Basically, dead students are like Emma's worst nightmare. And her worst reality, poor Emma. Number 10, reshaped the universe. This one only gets ranked lower because it comes to us from the alternate reality of a what if comic. In this what if story, Norman Osborn gets his hands on the Infinity Gauntlet and uses it to reshape reality, all to impress his daddy. What's even more awful is when his father confesses that he actually loves him. Norman then can't even bring himself to believe his father's acceptance, and in the end destroys his father, thereby destroying himself in the process. So this was in a weird way not just a bad thing he did to reality, but also did to his own self. Which I guess would be a good thing for reality. Definitely be a good thing for Spider-Man. Number 9, cheated. We find out about this one in Red Goblin, Red Death, and what's worse, it's a story that in the present day of that comic has a pretty gruesome ending. Here Norman runs into an old Empire University pal, if you could call him that. Ned Tobolowsky was someone Norman knew in school, and it's implied that at least they were friends, or at least acquaintances, before Ned spilled the beans about a cheating apparatus that Norman was using and had built. Ned's big mouth almost cost Norman his schooling. He lost his scholarship and was almost expelled, like these close. Honestly, if he created a cheating machine though, he probably should have been expelled in my opinion. Like, I don't know how they let him continue going to school after that. Norman gets Ned back though when Ned stops him on the street years later while he is Red Goblin. Not a good time. So true, what happens to Ned at least wasn't necessarily Green Goblin's doing, but I'm gonna count this anyways because 1, this thing happened way in his past, and 2, this list is more centered around Osborn as Goblin as opposed to like any specific Goblin identity. It's called Green Goblin, but I'm approaching it as like a Norman Osborn list. I know we've seen others wear that mantle as well, but I think Norman by far is one of the most dastardly goblins out there, red, green, or otherwise. Number 8, framed Spider-Man. If you think J. Jonah Jameson is bad, wait till you see what happens when Osborn takes over control of the Daily Bugle. At one point, Norman Osborn tries to use the paper himself to drag Spider-Man's name through the mud after buying it and then blackmailing Jameson into giving him full control over the paper and what gets published there. He then frames Spider-Man for murder, making it look like his webbing basically caused someone to die by asphyxiation, and puts a bounty on Spider-Man's head, starting off the Spider Hunt story arc. Of course, Peter finds a way out of all of this trouble and makes sure that Norman gets his in the end, but he still has to suffer through everyone hunting him down and believing that he was a killer, so still, it's pretty terrible. And before we move on to this next spot, just a quick reminder to give this video a thumbs up if you love Norman as much as we do. Love hate. Number 7, Chameleon tried to manipulate her. A lot of people have tried to creep on Mary Jane. Even Peter's villains have tried to get in on that creeping action, in the worst way possible too. At one point, Chameleon attempted to convince Mary Jane to sleep with him by trying to trick her, coming in disguised as Peter Parker. Fortunately, we found out Mary Jane has a spidey sense of her own. Her version displayed here seems to imply that MJ can sense when Peter is actually the one kissing her. So this would be seemingly forgotten later on in continuity by other writers. She said kissing Chameleon made her skin crawl, and immediately she knew something was up. Although this is awful, it did give us a really awesome MJ moment as well, as Mary Jane threatens Chameleon afterward, completely prepared to fight and defend herself. Back off, Chameleon. Also love when Mary Jane gets badass moments like that where she's like, I'm feisty too, I can take ya. Number 6, constantly being ditched for danger. This happens to Mary Jane more than once when she needs Peter. Honestly, she has to be one of the most understanding girlfriends and wives of the comic book world. Sure, it took her a while to take her and Peter's relationship seriously, but one thing she doesn't really do is judge Peter for wanting to be a hero. hero. She might worry about his safety constantly and their family's safety, but she pretty much exclusively supports his need to be Spider-Man. And even when he doesn't necessarily have to go off to do the hero thing, she still supports him leaving her in times of need. The amount of times this comes up is far too often for me to count. Poor Mary Jane, she's just alone to worry most of the time. Number 5. Attacked by Harry Osborn. Mary Jane has been one of the targets of many different attacks over the years, where villains were attempting to get back at Spider-Man. But one attack also likely extended to include her, not just because she was attached to Spider-Man, but because she was no longer dating the culprit. Harry Osborn in issue 136 of the original Amazing Spider-Man series attempted to blow up both Peter Parker and Mary Jane when they came home and opened the door. Mary Jane at the time had decided to unlock the door for Peter as a fun, rebellious, feministic act, which is weird, but if you read the issue makes sense, pretending to be a female chauvinist. Fortunately, as the explosion was about to go off, Peter's spidey sense started alerting him of danger, and he managed to jump in between Mary Jane and the explosion. Still, she would later end up being kidnapped by Harry as well in the same arc, along with Aunt May and Flash Thompson. Number 4. Kidnapped by Jonathan Caesar. Yeah, that's right, Mary Jane gets kidnapped a lot, that's a thing. I just talked about her being kidnapped, and also on part 1 of this list we talked about Mary Jane being kidnapped by a mutant who wanted to become Peter Parker and take over his life. But this time around, she was kidnapped by a man who is obsessed with her herself and wanted to marry Mary Jane, even though she was already married. Apparently when you have enough money you can ignore that people are married, that's what's claimed here. Caesar kidnapped Mary Jane and hid her in an apartment in Bedford Towers, which he owned. The apartment was made especially for this purpose, showing off just how crazy the millionaire real estate mogul Jonathan really was. Caesar's plan was to marry MJ and live happily ever after with her, but she had other plans and she tried to escape. Surprise, surprise. Eventually, despite Jonathan threatening her with violence, she did manage to get away and get back to the arms of Spider-Man. Although we never really delve into what mark this left on Mary Jane emotionally, she just seems to kind of get over it all quite quick. Like Peter's like, "Can you go back home by yourself?" And she's like, "Yeah, it's fine." I'd be like, "No, don't leave me. This is terrifying." Number 3. Manipulated by Wolverine. This was just plain wrong all around. Because the ultimate reality is often known for taking things too far, it was in this reality that Wolverine tried to manipulate Mary Jane into sleeping with him just because he didn't like Spider-Man. And I guess because he also likes redheads, but also, what is happening? Spider-Man and Wolverine have a touchy relationship even in the 616 continuity. In fact, we've seen how mad Peter gets when Wolverine even mentions Mary Jane's name in a context that he doesn't like. Remember that time he punched him out of a window through what was supposed to be unbreakable glass? If Peter wasn't just a kid at the time in the ultimate reality, I'm sure he would have done much worse. Wolverine, while in Peter's body, attempted to put the moves on Mary Jane, who innocently did not know that someone else was in her boyfriend's body. That thing where people forget about, Mary Jane's spidey sense, like I was saying. This is all kind of gross for multiple reasons, one being consent, another being that Wolverine is an adult man and is also like hundreds of years old, and MJ is just a teenager here, and another being that this was all about getting back at Peter. Fortunately, MJ does not end up being pressured into sleeping with Wolverine while he's in Peter's body, but it is implied that at least something physical happened between these two. Number 2. Manipulated by Dr. Octopus. This one happened when Dr. Octopus was in fact in Peter Parker's body, which I think makes it worse than if Mary Jane had actually made out with Dr. Octopus in his actual body. At the time, of course, MJ thought that Otto was actually Peter, since he'd swapped bodies with Peter and was living his life as him. She noted that he was behaving differently, but dismissed these red flags because she was just so happy to be with Peter again. Mary Jane, knowing Peter for as long as she has, however, you would think would therefore know something was amiss even instinctively, but apparently writers disagreed or just really wanted to see this happen for some reason. Mary Jane in fact almost at one point takes things to the next level with Superior Spider-Man, but fortunately they get interrupted. Thank goodness. Number 1. Smashed into a wall. A lot of people like to refer to this one as the time when Peter hit Mary Jane, but this was actually much more than a hit. Mary Jane came up from behind to try and break up the fight between Ben Reilly, Peter's clone, and Peter Parker. Not seeing her, Peter swung back and didn't just hit her, he knocked her back so hard with his fist that she slammed back into the wall and seemingly broke part of the machinery behind her. Honestly, I'm surprised she didn't just die right there, because that seems like a lot. Spider-Man is much stronger than he looks, having the proportional strength of a spider. Even worse, she was pregnant at the time. Very pregnant. Although during her pregnancy, you might not have known it because from issue to issue, her belly seems to swell and then flatten and then swell again. But that's comics for you.
Kicking off the list at number 10, smacked by Thanos. We got to see Captain America and many others get the beatdown of their lives in Avengers Infinity War, but in the comic, in Infinity Gauntlet, it was somehow even more brutal. Yet in part 4 of Jim Starlin's The Infinity Gauntlet, Thanos at one point weakens himself while maintaining the stones because he wanted to take on the Avengers in a more equal fight. All of this just to impress Death. So he makes himself weak and then fistfights them. It's crazy. So Captain America is leading the Avengers into battle, and at this point, everybody is getting hit. Cyclops gets his head stuck in a clear block of force. Vision gets his insides just torn out. And then Thanos sees Cap as having such an emotional outburst. And then after Thanos destroys Cap's shield, he gives him the mighty backhand of a lifetime, knocking him out cold. And before we continue on to number 9, guys, if you could just go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, because it really goes a long way for us here at the studio. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. Now back to the video. Number 9, he lost Bucky. Okay, 2005 was a wild time. We got to see Jason Todd return as the Red Hood, and Marvel had their own type of super sleeper assassin come back from the dead as well, Bucky Barnes. In 2005, Bucky Barnes returned, but of course he was never the same. Near the end of World War II, Bucky and Cap were trying to disarm a bomb on a plane while taking down Baron Zemo. The bomb went off, hurling Steve and Bucky into the freezing waters, and well, as for Cap, he came out of this pretty good. He remained frozen, just hanging out, and Bucky, he didn't end up so lucky. His body fell into the freezing waters, and at the time, a Soviet spy submarine was in the area crossing the English Channel. So they scooped him up, fixed the whole left arm situation, brainwashed him, and turned him into this brutal assassin. It's heartbreaking. See, he has all these incredible abilities that make him a fierce warrior, but he doesn't remember how he got them, making him this deadly assassin and a super crazy villain to handle. This is Steve's right-hand man. Every conflict that they go through is just painful. One of the biggest turning points of Marvel was the introduction of the Winter Soldier. This was a conflict that came to life on the big screen back in 2014 with the Winter Soldier, and we're kind of still seeing Bucky try and figure this life out. With the Falcon and the Winter Soldier coming next month on Disney Plus, we can see even more of what he has to go through post-Winter Soldier times. Number 8, Hail Hydra. This next one resulted in writer Nick Spencer getting death threats. That's right, so fans were mostly not okay with this one. Back in 2016, Captain America said 2 words that would throw every comic book fan for a loop: Hail Hydra. It all went down in 2017 Secret Wars, when Captain America's reality had been rewritten secretly by Kobik, who was a sentient cosmic cube acting under the influence of the Red Skull. So as a child, Steve was recruited and raised to believe in their ideology, which was the strong ruling for the weak, for the good of all. Now there's a pleasant nod to this in Avengers Endgame, of course, when the team goes back in time to the first Avengers plot. We see Steve get in the elevator to try and get the scepter, and then we see the whole Hydra/Shield elevator stocked full of guys. Now we don't know this at the time, but that's fully Hydra. But Steve knows this. So instead of beating everybody up and kicking ass in the elevator like he did in Winter Soldier, he just said, "Hail Hydra." And then just like that, he walked out of the elevator with a smirk on his face. It was beautiful. Number 7, Old Man Cap. At the end of Avengers Endgame, now that we're talking about it, we see Captain America return the Infinity Stones. Only he doesn't shoot back to the present day after he's done. No, he sticks around, hangs out with Peggy, dances the night away, and then we see him as an old man giving the shield down to Sam Wilson just minutes later. It's a lovely end to Chris Evans' run on the character. You got a lot of feels. But in the comics, we also saw an old Captain America, but this time, it wasn't on his terms. The Iron Nail sucked all of Cap's serum out, leaving him not ripped, but also not young as well. So now Steve looked 90, and there's no way you're gonna fight at that age, let alone pick up a shield. So he would lead the Avengers and call out orders from the radio. It sounds like a pretty sweet job for us, but for Steve, he's probably like, man, this is the most boring job I've had in my entire life. Number 6, Johnny Blaze. Marvel Spotlight issue 5, we see a legend being born. The Ghost Rider. See, Johnny Blaze was a stunt performer, and when his stepfather, Crash Simpson, got cancer, Johnny opted to make a deal with Mephisto to save him. And then when Crash tried to return to the stunt life, he crashed. So now Johnny's upset and he has a few choice words for the devil. So Crash still ended up passing away after all, just not from cancer. Kind of not a great deal. So when Mephisto returned to collect his soul, because he thinks that's a fair deal, Roxanne intervened and used the spell of banishment from one of Johnny's books. Before Mephisto got cast away, he grafted the essence of the demon Zarathos to Johnny's body, thus creating the Ghost Rider. Imagine if Roxanne hadn't showed up, he would have just tricked another poor person into trading souls for some lousy deal. Careful what you wish for, folks. Number 5, Silver Surfer. When Mephisto first came into Marvel Comics, many thought it was during the events of Ghost Rider, like I just mentioned. He actually tried taking Norrin Radd's soul before in Silver Surfer issue 3. The power and the prize. The story begins with the Silver Surfer being tracked down by Mephisto because he's drawn to his power and nobility. What a perfect soul to take. The guy's great. He sees him as an obstacle, of course, because he's the Silver Surfer and he's amazing. So Mephisto captures Norrin Radd's love to use as bait, but the Silver Surfer beat him down. He's one of the few Marvel heroes that actually had defeated Mephisto. So honestly, if the devil ends up showing up in WandaVision at some point, I wouldn't be surprised if the Silver Surfer is next up shortly after. I think we're gonna go more cosmic, especially with Thor 4. Definitely with Thor 4. Number 4, Cynthia Von Doom. The mother of Victor Von Doom. She was known, of course, to dabble in the dark arts. She often communicated with demons and used spells. She was born in Latveria into a Romani clan, and her people were constantly facing persecution at the hands of the Baron and his men. So she turned to Mephisto to make a deal, promising her soul in exchange to punish them. So he gave her powers to take care of them, but the only thing was that same power would also take care of the children that were there as well. So he gave her the power, but just not the control. So she couldn't live with herself after what she had done to the children, so she made her husband promise that her son would never follow her footsteps. And then after that, her soul moved to her forever home, which was hell. Number 3, using James Mandarin. Doctor Strange Volume 2, Issue 15, titled Where There's Smoke. We see Mephisto use James Mandarin as a pawn against Doctor Strange. It's brutal. So the issue kicks off with Doctor Strange saving a woman from a fire. And when he returns home, he meets up with Clea. But before they can even catch up, a man named James Mandarin comes to the door. But he has a knife in his hand and he claims to know who and what Doctor Strange truly is. But Doctor Strange plays it cool, of course. James does not play it cool. See, he wants to be Strange's disciple. So he slashes at his own throat to make Doctor Strange use his powers and save him. What a power play. Also, you're so insane, but power play indeed. So Strange heals him up, of course, and he proudly puts it together that no normal doctor could have patched him up that fast. And then out pops the devil to make things just that much more exciting. So now the next issue is Strange saving his love from the afterlife. So while Strange waits for the help of Wong to get him out of there, he has to then face off against all sorts of illusions and deceptions unleashed by the devil. They're trying to change him into one of the Hell Lord's minions. So Wanda Maximoff is playing a role in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. So I feel like WandaVision will introduce Mephisto, and then in his movie he'll have to go in and finish off the Unholy Terrors with Wanda's help. Number 2, Fragments of Greater Darkness. So Avengers West Coast Volume 2, Issue 52, we find out the truth behind Scarlet Witch's children, Billy and Tommy. Again, this is another WandaVision theory that I think is happening. Listen up, here we go. So like I said earlier, these 5 pieces of Pandemonium's soul were actually Mephisto's. So Mephisto tricked Pandemonium and then gathered beings possessing the appropriate fragments. 2 of those 5 fragments just happened to be children of Scarlet Witch and Vision. So when Pandemonium arrived, he took the kids, which in turn gave Mephisto full strength, and then this of course left Scarlet Witch having a breakdown. Again, it's been hinted at that Agnes in WandaVision is actually Agatha Harkness, which would make sense. She's a witch. And then in episode 6, we saw everybody in their comic accurate look, and she was of course rocking the witch outfit. Coincidence? I think not. And finally, number 1, One More Day. We finish off with this 4-parter, the One More Day Spider-Man storyline. It began in 2007 in Amazing Spider-Man issue 544, and instead of Pete dealing with the usual thugs or some enhanced science villain with a tail, we see Spider-Man make a deal with the devil. So after Spider-Man revealed his identity in the Civil War storyline, people of course were after him now. So when a bullet strikes Aunt May instead of Peter, he of course feels like he's the one to blame. Absolutely, you took your mask off, that's what happens. Even the opening of the story, it shows Aunt May in a hospital bed with Peter at her side, talking about how she was perfectly fine just a mere days ago. It's very sad. And Mephisto has entered the chat once again. He offers Peter a deal while Aunt May is dying. So basically what happens is that the world will forget about Peter's identity and Aunt May will live. But the whole Mephisto magic is that MJ and Peter never got married. That's just gonna go away. So it's a lose-lose, and you're just trying to be a superhero. So they hug one final time, and MJ explains that their love was always meant to be, and that whatever Mephisto does is unstoppable. And then poof, the deal is sealed. The next day, Peter wakes up, all is fine and normal in his casual life. All that backstory was just wiped out in the turn of a page. Thanks to Mephisto, because your deals are just great.
Number 10 is childhood. Superheroes usually don't have an easy childhood. Either they're bullied, they're born with advanced abilities that that make them an outcast or a threat, or something traumatic happens with their parents. And in the case of Sam Wilson, he grew up in a tough neighborhood in Harlem, and his father Paul was a minister and tragically met his fate one night after trying to stop a fight between two gangs. Sam was only 9 years old when this happened, and soon after, his mother Darlene was attacked by a mugger and she didn't make it. She passed away protecting her children. Sam, being so young and vulnerable, struggled with his parents passing, and his path hasn't always been that of a hero's path, because before he became the Falcon, he became... Guys, before we continue on to number 9 on our list, we just want to say thank you so much for watching, and if you haven't done so already, if you could go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, because it really does help us out on our channel quite a bit. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. Now back to some more Sam Wilson. Number 9. Snap Wilson. So after the death of his parents, Sam figured the next move would be to dip down into the criminal life. He was angry, he was upset. This was probably what I would have done. So he went by the name of Snap Wilson, and long ago in the comics, there was a Captain America and Falcon issue that said, "Revealed at last, the true facts behind the origin of the Falcon." And then it says, "Today, Falcon slays Captain America at the command of the Red Skull." What? So this history with Sam being a hustler was retconned so that the Red Skull had in fact used the Cosmic Cube in order to make Sam a criminal turned into Captain. Now, it was apparently part of Red Skull's plan to use Falcon against Steve when the time was right down the road. Now, later on in Captain America issue 276, this retcon was cleared up even more when Sarah refers back to Snap Wilson yet again. She goes on to explain in that issue that it was all over the newspapers back when the Red Skull used Sam against Captain America. So many writers throughout many of these years of comics actually wanted to retcon the whole Snap Wilson phase, appropriately so. Number 8, the other Snap. I mean, turning into dust and vanishing for 5 years, that's probably gotta suck. Now, of course, we have to mention Infinity War on this list. So when Thanos had all of the stones but one, everybody made a last effort to stop the Mad Titan, but it just wasn't enough power. Falcon tried to stop him by shooting his twin guns at him, but Thanos used the Space Stone on him to knock him out of the air onto the ground. Ouch. And then Thanos then gave each and every other Avenger a piece of pain, with Vision of course being last, having his Mind Stone pulled out of his forehead. And after he obtained all of the Infinity Stones, it just got worse. Falcon turned into ashes while he was crawling through the grass of Wakanda, and while he was fading out of existence, Rhodey was seen not too far behind him calling out Sam's name. So sad. I was so happy when he came back, but like, man, having that be the last that we saw of all these heroes for a whole year, that wasn't easy on my emotions. Number 7, Roscoe Simons. Roscoe was a Captain America fan, as we all are, and he got the opportunity of a lifetime in Captain America issue 181. He proved himself more than capable to carry the shield after Cap had left it, and it was up to Sam Wilson to train Roscoe Simons. So Sam had this mindset. He was hopeful that Roscoe would see the real life dangers of actually wearing the suit. It wasn't just Halloween, you put on a suit, you whip a frisbee, and then you're like, cool, I got him. It was scary, it was hard. It was at a time in the government where it wasn't a good idea to be this type of character. And he was hoping that he would retire. But in issue 182, Sam tells Roscoe that he's gonna look after him. So Falcon did his best to protect the new hero, but in the very next issue, we see front and center the death of a hero. It was pretty brutal as well how Red Skull took him out. It was a very public way in order to warn others who want to step up to that same mantle. Now poor Roscoe, but also poor Sam Wilson. He told this guy he'd watch his back, and now he has his blood on his hands, and also he has his blood on his future suit, which is not ideal.
Number 6, Seeing Red. Captain America issue 350. We have a front cover that is sure to draw you in. The supersized 350th issue. So after months of manipulation from the resurrected Red Skull, Steve Rogers confronts and defeats his replacement, John Walker. Now he also has to battle Red Skull. His hands are literally full in this issue, it's great. But at this point, it's a little tough because the Red Skull is now a cloned Steve Rogers, and that includes having the super soldier powers as well, so it's not easy. So due to his dust of death, his red mask shrunk, and now that was his permanent face. So it's the return of Red Skull in a way. So Steve may have returned the mantle of Captain America now that John Walker's out of the picture, but now we have the return of one Red Skull yet again.
Number 5, tried to make Spider-Man his heir. If you can't beat him, make them join you. That was Norman's thinking in the Revenge of the Green Goblin story anyways. Here, Norman attempts to brainwash Peter Parker into giving in to his dark side and joining the Green Goblin legacy. I guess I should say his green side. Of course, Norman didn't succeed in the end, but for a moment there it almost seemed like he might. He also put Peter through hell during this whole endeavor, so regardless of whether or not his plan was successful, it was still pretty awful for Peter the whole time. Number 4, killed JJ. That's right, while in main continuity, JJ would end up being blackmailed by Norman Osborn, in the Ultimate Universe, he would end up being murdered by him. I know, so crazy, especially considering that Jameson thought he had actually shot Norman dead and was in the middle of panicking over the fact. Norman, however, surprised him by getting up and transforming into his goblin self, revealing that in this universe, he was Immortal Green Goblin. Yep, before we had the Immortal Hulk series, we had this. Number 3, director of Hammer. During Dark Reign, we see Norman Osborn basically become the head of what ends up being the S.H.I.E.L.D. replacement. Due to the fact that he eliminated the Skrull Queen, he gets to take over and creates his own agency called Hammer, an acronym that doesn't initially stand for, well, anything actually. It was just picked because Osborn thought it was cool. As the director of Hammer, Osborn also took it upon himself to put together his own Avenger team, with him as the leader, Iron Patriot. Being a villain himself, you can guess what kind of people he called on to assemble his Avengers team. More villains, and some really confused and tormented heroes like Sentry. This was a really dark time in Marvel's history, as Norman Osborn used all this power to do all sorts of awful stuff, all under the guise or in the often false name of heroic reasoning. Number 2, killed Gwen Stacy. We all know this one to be one of the worst things that Norman as the Green Goblin has done, so I don't think it's a surprise that this one is high up on our list. One of the worst, not just from Peter's perspective, by the way, but also from fans' perspectives. Many still believe that Gwen was actually the one destined to be with Peter, and in fact that she would be a better match for him than Mary Jane herself. I personally love MJ and Peter together, and I like to think of Gwen's death as a what if that can only really ever theoretically be answered if she lived. Still, even just from Spider-Man's perspective, this has to be one of the most dastardly deeds his foe has ever committed, as Peter Parker for years has also still blamed himself for Gwen's demise, making this wound just that much more tender, that much more deep. As Green Goblin did it, but then Peter still blamed himself. Rough. Number 1, had children with Gwen Stacy. It was really hard for me to try and reason which of these last few points was really the worst, because they're all really bad, especially these last two, killing Gwen or having children with her. Which one is worse? In the end, however, considering that he later kills her, I figured this one took the cake. Yep, as if Norman Osborn wasn't diabolical and creepy enough in the comics, we had to retcon in something even more nauseating for him. Enter Sin's past. Here it's retconned in that Norman and Gwen slept together, and as if that wasn't bad enough, he got her pregnant. She gave birth to twins in secrecy in Europe, who would be raised by Norman to think that Spider-Man was their father, and that it was he who had killed their mother. I'm not sure if it gets any worse than that, but if it does, I don't think I want to find out how it gets worse.
Number 10, A Date with the Devil. In New Mutants Volume 3, Issue 30, we find Mephisto taking a pretty strange deal. I mean, compared to his normal read the fine print soul collecting type of deal, that is. This time around, a team of X-Men accidentally enter the home of Mephisto, the underworld, literally hell. So he offered to let them go about their super business and leave hell on one condition. That condition being that he gets a date night with Amara Aquila. So the team encourages her to say no, but she seals the deal. Mephisto says, "Hey, I'll call you," and then whoosh, they're all gone. Just like that, the team is free. So the team rescued Blink, and then Amara prepared for her date. Issue 37, titled A Date with the Devil, we see Magma double checking that she looks good for her date night coming up, making sure the curls look good, eyeliner's great, we're looking good, let's do it. And just like prom night, her man arrives at the door with flowers. What a gentleman. So they dine, of course, in the third circle of hell, overlooking a lake of lava with volcanoes going off. It's quite the spectacle. I mean, Niagara Falls, hell, you know, both are pretty romantic. And of course, they had an amazing pit band to set the mood. She returns back to normal life and admits that she had a pretty decent time once he stopped trying so hard. See, usually when a friend goes on a date, you know, it's exciting to see how it went. Now, imagine if your roommate went on a date with the devil. Oh my god. The amount of tea I would make them spill, we'd never sleep. We'd talk all night. I'd also be worried sick. I'd be like, "Hey, how was your night?" He was the devil, so are you good? Is your soul good? Awesome. As far as force deals go, this one wasn't too bad. But there's plenty more on this list. And before we get to number 9, guys, if you could go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, because because it really helps out our studio quite a bit. Thank you so much for watching. Now back to this crazy list. Number 9, closing time. If you've worked at a bar, you know it's the worst when people stay right until the very end, right until closing time. Or even worse, they'll show up minutes before you're about to get out of there. Like 3 minutes before last call, someone will walk in, grab a drink, and then they'll just chill and unwind the entire night, which is fine, but sometimes you're like, hey man, I've been here for 10 hours, I gotta go home. Now imagine if one of those late night visits was from Mephisto. See, in Journey into Mystery issue 627, we see another hobby of the devil's besides taking souls that bartenders will tell stories of. What he would do is show up every night to a random bar or a pub, and then he tells a story. He vents, he lets things off his chest. And if you listen and survive, he'll give you a really nice tip. And I'm talking like a really, really nice tip. You don't have to work anymore at a bar after that point. But if you slip up, things can go pretty south pretty fast. Now this amuses Mephisto. He enjoys playing along and chatting it up with the poor soul who offered to pick up that shift that night. I wonder if I'm going to see him one night, hopefully. Fingers crossed. Actually, no, let's not see him. Let's not do that. Number 8. What happens in Vegas? Doctor Strange Damnation is a 4-parter that puts Mephisto and Doctor Strange in the most epic game of blackjack. Yeah, you thought Casino Royale had like the high stakes? No devil involved. No way. Just Daniel Craig. So following the destruction of Las Vegas after Hydra's short-lived empire, Doctor Strange tried putting the city back to normal using his magic. But in doing so, it resulted in this hotel emerging from the ground, and that hotel just happened to be Hotel Inferno. And of course, inside that hotel is Mephisto. Yeah, it turns out when the city went down, Mephisto claimed all of their souls in hell. So in order to come to an agreement to save the city and the people inhabiting it, a game of brimstone blackjack was in order. I mean, being forced on a date is one thing, but a game of blackjack with the devil? I mean, what a better way to start an adventure. Number 7. Master Pandemonium. Martin Preston made his comic book appearance in West Coast Avengers Volume 2, Issue 4. He was a student at Juilliard and a big-time Hollywood star. I mean, the guy was killing it. He had money, fame, he was in his 50s, but the guy looked like he was early 40s. Just killing it, just killing the game. Then he thought it would be a cool idea to drink and drive. Not a cool idea, never do that. So of course, after the crash, he was approached by Mephisto, and Mephisto had repaired his arm by calling forward a demon. Imagine if Bucky had his arm replaced by a demon. God, it would be a mess. Leaving a 5-point shaped hole in his chest, Mephisto had lied to Martin and said that it's because he had separated his soul into 5 different places among Earth's dimension. That was in fact a lie. In actuality, Mephisto had replaced his other limbs with demons as well. So now he's a walking, talking Trojan horse for the devil. Number 6. Became Captain America. One of the biggest game changers in the MCU was when John Walker came out at the end of the episode, winked at the camera, and then showed us his brand new Captain America suit in the meantime. This happened, of course, in the comics as well, when Steve Rogers had to abandon his identity due to the Red Skull's manipulation of the Commission on Superhuman Activities. So now somebody has to suit up, somebody has to take his spot. The government needed a new figure. So in issue 333 of Captain America, it was titled The Replacement. The government's weighing their options on who should be the next to lead the nation, so they go with the guy who just launched a dude off of a building. Awesome, John Walker just got the promotion of a lifetime. And now we're all screwed. Number 5. Buck upgrade. So now he's got a brand new suit, he's got the best frisbee of all time, but what else does John Walker need? Well, how about some backup for starters? He brings back the bold urban commandos who I mentioned earlier. The Buckies, as they're referred to, wore Captain America masks, boots, pants, but they were topless for some reason. I don't know, maybe they were into wrestling growing up. John's right-hand man, Lamar Hoskins, has been by John's side since the military, so he was obviously asked to be the main sidekick, who we also got to meet in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And he stood tall on the front cover of Captain America issue 334, and now he goes by the name Battlestar. The other 2 guys also got a cool upgrade. Now they're referred to as left and right winger. They were cool until they revealed John's identity to the public, and then they were kind of not cool. Left winger and right winger tried to use John's old Super Patriot tech against him, but they were eventually beaten down and arrested. So now with his identity out and about, it was only time for John to take on another super alias. This time, number 4, becoming US agent. He's back again. One of his more stylish looks, if you ask me, but John Walker returns, this time with a blacked out Captain America suit, and the shield is also less spangly. He comes back and he's put to the test. He's forced to battle an Ironmonger, and when he goes to take it down alone, the shield actually seems to work out pretty well for him. Because in the comics, it was actually Taskmaster who trained him how to use that shield in the first place. And judging by the trailers for Black Widow, because we still have to watch those until it's released, it looks like Taskmaster can throw a frisbee quite well. Number 3. He joined the Avengers. In West Coast Avengers issue 45, when Hawkeye sets up a team, well, on the West Coast, the government wanted an official in there to make sure all was going well. So funny enough, at this time in the comics, Vision was also trying to get government clearance again, so they sent in US agent. This led to John rescuing his former partner, Battlestar, from the power broker, so now this guy has his buddy back and he's part of the Avengers. That's a pretty risky spot to put John Walker. I hope we never see him join the Avengers on the big screen, but seeing White Vision in the mix now kind of makes me nervous. Maybe the West Coast Avengers will happen, maybe, just maybe. Number 2, he joined the Force Works. After the West Coast Avengers fell apart, because naturally that's what happens when John Walker is part of the team, the costume and the shield were tossed to the side. So Tony Stark put together an all-new team known as Force Works. Scarlet Witch talked John Walker into joining the team because she honestly believed that John was the backbone to the entire squad. She kind of liked how he would run things. So he planned on running the team on tight military lines and the values of strength and dedication. So John joined the team and he wore a fancy new suit with an upgraded shield. This time it was an energy shield. John remained a member and went against the Kree, the Scatter, and the Mandarin. He was doing an alright job until he reverted back to his old ways. One mission had Force Works team up with the Avengers, and that wasn't a pleasant reunion. John Walker went into conflict with War Machine and Hawkeye, so he had to quit the Force Works as well. God, you can't put this guy anywhere. And last but not least, number 1, he took the serum. In the emotional ending of episode 4, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, we find out what John Walker did to the remaining vial of the Super Soldier Serum. He took it. Yeah. Zemo broke most of them except for one. John talked it over with Lamar Hoskins about if he would take the serum if presented the opportunity. So when Walker he does in fact take it, and it's shown to us in a pretty brutal way. While looking for Lamar, Walker reunited with Sam, and then they were all ambushed by the Flag Smashers, Nico and Dovik included. Now Nico held back Walker for a moment, just long enough that Carly Morgenthau would attack Walker. Now luckily Lamar got in the way, and then that's when Carly accidentally delivered a fatal blow to Lamar. And this caused John Walker to lash out, and it's pretty bad. He can't control himself at this point. The serum has made him powerful and even more insane. And when he's attacking Nico in the heat of the moment, he goes a little bit too far. Poor Nico. This was the same episode where he told Carly that he was actually a Captain America fan growing up, so double. Kicking off the list at number 10. Del Rusk. Once upon a time, the Red Skull actually weaseled his way into the position of US Secretary of Defense. Except this time, he was using the identity of Del Rusk. This begins in Avengers Volume 3, Issue 65. So Del Rusk decided to develop and test this biological weapon at Mount Rushmore. It's this horrible dust that really does a lot of damage to all the hikers. Everybody just out there enjoying their day. I mean, it's midday, one of the most beautiful places in the world, and Del Rusk just destroys this entire area. Kids are coughing in cars, people can't see where they're driving. It's honestly madness. Now this dust was actually a flesh-eating virus that left burns all over your skin. It got so bad that the Avengers had to suit up in hazmat suits. And then in the next issue, in the Red Zone Part 2, Black Panther beat him up so badly that he broke Red Skull's jaw right in half. That's more than fair considering the hysteria you've caused. And before we go on to number 9, if you guys could go ahead and give us a thumbs up on this video, it does magical wonders for our page. It's really helpful. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for supporting. Now back to the list on Red Skull. Number 9. Ultimate Red Skull. Making his debut in the Ultimate Comics, Avengers 1, back in 2009, Ultimate Red Skull is a little different than the Red Skull we know from our main continuity. He's actually the son of Steve Rogers and Gail Richards. They even hid him and trained him to become the next Captain America. It's wild. The Ultimates are insane. So we always feared that he would never live up to his father's expectations. I mean, fair. And then at just age 17, he took out all these doctors and soldiers around him in the military, and now he was in charge, and now his new goal was planning a way out. He then got the haunting look by using a kitchen knife and carving his head, which is just lovely. Here you go. That's a nice image for you all on this lovely day. Number 8, Streets of Poison. This next one goes down during Captain America issue 376 to 378, when Red Skull had initially offered up an alliance with Kingpin. But why? Well, because there was this narcotic that the Red Skull was trying to bring into New York, but Wilson Fisk refused to work with somebody like the Red Skull. So now we got two villains not cooperating with each other, so next comes a full-on drug war. Now, luckily, Kingpin took down Red Skull. I mean, when it comes to hand-to-hand combat, even Spider-Man struggles with Kingpin, so of course he's doomed. Big fists, like Donkey Kong. So he went down, and Kingpin actually spared his life on the condition that he just stays away from his territory. What are you, Walter White? Don't bring that stuff in here. Get out of here. I'm the one who knocks you out. Bam, Kingpin. Number 7, Mother Superior. After the Red Skull's revival, he figured he needed to start a family. Well, rather, he just figured he needed an heir to his evil throne after he retires. So he fathered a daughter on Exile Island to a washerwoman. Sadly, she didn't make it after the birth, but Johan raised this young daughter in this mansion called the Skull House. Clever name, I get it. Skull, Red Skull, nice. But because this is the Red Skull, it wasn't an ordinary life at all. See, through advanced biological means, he made it so she would become an adult in a very short period of time. And of course, if that wasn't already hectic enough, he set her up with some superpowers. That daughter being appropriately named Sin, short for Cynthia Schmidt. But she went on to become Mother Superior, the leader of a group called the Sisters of Sin, where other orphan girls would come along and go through the same process. You've just made a new villain. Way to go. Number 6, he broke up the band. When Thanos finally decided to get out of that big old chair and start hunting down the Infinity Stones, he took out the Avengers group by group. He punched the Hulk so hard in the neck that the Hulk retired. But when you think about why our heroes were so divided in the first place, you have to give Zemo props for making it a hell of a lot easier for the Mad Titan. An empire toppled by its enemies can rise again, but one which crumbles from within, that's dead forever. Waited in a bunker for Steve, Bucky, and Stark to show up in Captain America Civil War, and when they did, the 5 Winter Soldiers each were already taken out by Zemo. Yeah, it turns out he never meant to actually wake the other Winter Soldiers up at all. No, instead it was revealed to Stark that Bucky was actually the cause of his parents' untimely death all those years ago. It was a mission to retrieve other Winter Soldier serums, and because the Winter Soldier was the one to take them, there can't be any survivors or witnesses. Sorry, Tony. This, of course, sent Tony and Steve into one of the most heartbreaking battles in the MCU, and it ended with Tony taking off Bucky's arm and Cap dropping the shield, walking away. The two didn't meet back up until after Thanos had snapped away half of all the life in the universe, all because Zemo and his perfectly timed viewing party. Good work.
Coming in at number 5, we have Kangaroo. I brought this up in the first video. If you're a villain or a hero and you're choosing your power, you don't have to pick something lame. It seems like some of these villains focus way too much on the branding of their super persona rather than the powers. With Kangaroo, it seemed that the villain was set on theming themselves after kangaroos rather than having a cool power. He has implants in his legs that allow him to jump very far, and he's also a skilled boxer. Like, not the worst combination of things, but when you're hell-bent on taking out Spidey by stomping on him, you're probably going to lose a lot. There was this weird time in the 70s and 80s where Australia was this thing that the media was trying to push. It was foreign, it was interesting, no one really knew how to sell it. The closest that we got was Crocodile Dundee. But this villain seems like the big wigs at Marvel wanted to make an Australian themed villain because they thought kids would like it, rather than thinking of a good character first. Coming in at number 4, we have the Swarm. Have you guys seen that episode of South Park where they make a joke that the writers from Family Guy are just manatees in a tank and they all pull out 3 random topics to base an episode around? Well, that's what the Swarm feels like. They were like German scientists, killer bees, purple cape. This dude is lame, not only because he's a swarm of bees that is being controlled by a dead scientist's consciousness, but also because this dude gets beat by bug repellent. When him and Spidey face off, Spidey's able to beat him by spraying down his suit in bug spray, and then the Swarm literally can't get close enough to fight and has to run away. If your weakness can be purchased at Home Depot, then you're a pretty lame villain if you ask me. Coming in at number 3, we have Grizzly. I like how in the Marvel universe, if you're a bear enthusiast, you'll eventually get superpowers and become one of the lamest villains that Peter Parker has to fight on a semi-regular basis. But if you're a bear enthusiast in real life, you just get eaten by bears. 2 very different outcomes. Well, Maxwell Markham was just that, a dude who loves bears, and get this, he was also a wrestler who hurt his fellow wrestlers too much, so he got kicked out of the league. We got a dude who loves bears, he used to be a wrestler. What's the third thing that's going to set this guy into the manatee formula? Oh, he was also given a bear suit that would hook him up with some superpowers. Where did he get this suit? Well, he got it from the Jackal, who's one of Spider-Man's best villains, but that dude has a lot of dud moves. I feel like the Jackal just wakes up some days and is like, what if I gave a dude a bear suit so he thought he was a real villain and then Spider-Man would have to deal with it? That would be jokes. Some of his plots sound more like pranks than actual schemes to cause mayhem. Coming in at number 2, we have Hypno Hustler. Next, we have a villain that not only has a lame weakness, but their powers were used to such a small scale that doesn't really make any sense why this character was ever made. Hypno Hustler is Anthony Del Soin. and he has music that can take over your mind. His songs allow him to control people around him and then they do his bidding. But the thing is, if he hears his own music, he will also become hypnotized. He can't even handle his own groovy music, which seems strange. I've never heard of a hypnotist hypnotizing themselves. But when we first see Hypno Hustler, he's shaking people down for just their pocket change at a show. I feel like this guy should have had bigger dreams. If he got one of his songs on the radio, he could have taken over the world. And coming at the #1 spot, we have Humbug. Here's the thing, when you hear that there's a hero based off a spider, that's kinda cool, because at least spiders are scary, they make web, they do some interesting things. But when you hear there's a villain that just has a general insect theme, you can throw that one in the trash. I really couldn't dislike this villain more. For one, he should be able to beat Spider-Man because he's got a super suit that gives him skills that are on par with the web slinger. But this guy has the worst weakness of all, a love for bugs. He loves bugs so much that Spider-Man has been able to halt this guy from a life of crime by telling him he's going to smash some cockroaches. Like, dude, give your head a shake.
Kicking off the list at number 10, put on a show. Okay, Peter's life is pretty balanced. I mean, he takes selfies for the Daily Bugle, gets a little bit of cash, gets thrown off a building, has to fight a giant lizard, you name it. With Peter's life, his superhero and work go hand in hand. So in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 4, released back in 1963, we see Peter and he had just finished laying out Sandman. But he forgot to snag a couple of photos of the action. He didn't take any selfies, which is the worst. It's like when you blow candles out on your cake and then your mom's like, nope, you blinked, light them up again. Gotta keep trying this, it's for the scrapbook, let's go. Then you're like, I'm tired. So Peter grabs sand, like just sand off the ground, tosses it up in the air, and then punches through the sand. He's like, yeah, people are gonna buy this, it's the Sandman. And then people do buy it. What a liar. He comes back in all cool, out of breath, like, good people, you can breathe easy. Meanwhile, his Instagram is just popping off with likes. God, what a liar. I mean, you gotta do what you gotta do. You gotta get clout. You gotta get that super clout. And before we list off some more of Peter's dark days, if you guys could go ahead and toss us a thumbs up, because it really helps us out here at the studio. If we get enough likes, they won't kill me. Number 9. Giving away Edith. Following the events of Avengers Endgame, aka the Snappening, we see Peter Parker trying to move on in a very new world, while mourning the loss of a co-worker and father figure that is Tony Stark. He wants to just live a normal life. He wants to go away on a trip with his friends and not have any moons hucked at him from any titans. So after trying to ghost Nick Fury in the process, he's handed down Edith, Tony's sweet AI glasses. After a mix-up that almost had his classmate executed by one of Tony's drones, he decides that the handsome, caped, random Jake Gyllenhaal that just came out of nowhere as Mysterio is a safe bet for the tech. I mean, he looks great in the glasses, but like, it's Jake Gyllenhaal, he's gonna look great in anything. But come on, Peter, you think after toying with Stark's suit years before that maybe it's a little bit too much responsibility? I'll get into that later. Number 8, the Betty Brant affair.
Hey, Betty.
So Betty is a staff member at the Daily Bugle. She's been played by Elizabeth Banks in the Tobey Maguire trilogy, and Angourie Rice plays a younger version of her in the new MCU Tom Holland version. Believe it or not though, Betty was actually the first woman that Peter was attracted to when he first started selling photos to the Daily Bugle. So they dated for a bit, but ultimately it didn't work out. No biggie, it happens. Cut 2 years down the road, Peter's marriage proposal didn't work out too well. She said no, and Betty's marriage to Ned at this point was also not working out. She was having a bit of a rough patch. So she went to Peter for some comfort, and then the obvious happened. She's still married, Pete. Don't do it.
Your shots are so good.
I'd love to shoot you sometime.
Peter Parker. Peter.
Number 7 was defeated? But how can this be the worst? Well, because it put Loki in a position of great power, and he would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for his meddling brother Thor. Some theorize that in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Loki actually allowed himself to be defeated by the Avengers in that first film. The whole invading Earth wasn't actually something he wanted or needed, but it was actually all part of a grander scheme to get caught and then be put in exactly the place he needed and in fact wanted to be in order for him to later take over Asgard. Of course, we don't know if this is true or if he was really the puppet in an even greater scheme where Thanos was the master the whole time, which does kinda sound more likely, but I like to think that almost everything has been part of Loki's plan, including any deaths he's seemingly suffered, because he's just a master manipulator. Also, all these deaths are all fake, and I don't believe any of them. I see you, Loki. Even that last one, we got that last one, everyone was like, oh, he's definitely dead, and I was like, he'll be back. I don't believe it. And he is back now. Granted, it's a different version of him, but still, I'm gonna take it. I'm gonna say, don't believe any of it. Don't believe any deaths. They're all lies. Number 6. Impersonated Scarlet Witch. And while impersonating her, also kinda made out with Clint Barton, who was Ronin at the time. In fact, this is one of the things that tipped the heroes off to her true identity, because apparently Clint has some kind of magical kissing power. Wait a minute, that's not Scarlet Witch. I would know her kiss anywhere. Since when did Clint and Wanda make out enough for him to be able to identify her kiss instantly? Also, how different are Loki's and Wanda's kissing styles? I want to know. Like, are they radically different? Are they a little different? What level are we talking about here? Loki's plan here, of course, was to impersonate Wanda so he could help create his own team of Avengers, which he would then use against Norman Osborn. Perhaps he was resentful because he wasn't invited to Osborn's Dark Avengers? How rude. While multiple people were suspicious that it wasn't Wanda, eventually Loki's illusion was broken fully by Wiccan, Wanda's reincarnated, formerly self-constructed son. I hope that makes sense to you. That's what he is, I don't know. Before we move on to the next spot, it's time to do that thing. You know that thing where you click that like button if you are liking this video. Yeah, do the thing. Number 5. Betrayed Thor. Was anyone surprised? No, not even Thor was surprised on this one, but it didn't make it any less awful. This moment comes to us from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. In Thor Ragnarok, after Loki and Thor finally seem to be willing to put the past behind them and work together for once to save Asgard, Loki decides to betray his brother yet again. He plans to alert the authorities and have Thor captured in exchange for a hefty reward, meaning that Thor would be likely eternally imprisoned and trapped on Sakaar, which would also leave Asgard eternally doomed with Hela in charge. Easier to let it burn, Loki says, before Thor reveals he was expecting the betrayal and tases him remotely. Number 4. Tried to fool the X-Men and almost succeeded. During the 80s, Alpha Flight and X-Men had a team-up 2-part story, which of course started with both teams fighting one another, but all due to a greater misunderstanding. And yeah, actually Alpha Flight during the 80s was a big thing. It was huge. We don't talk about Alpha Flight much anymore, but they were a big deal back then. Loki was up to some sneaky business here where he was trying to convince the northern gods that he was, trying to help mortals, that he was a good guy, when really he was trying to create chaos. Surprise, surprise. He had a fire fountain at his disposal, which not only sounds super flashy, but also granted magical clothing and cool powers to mortals, as well as I believe eternal life. The X-Men ended up in the city containing the fire fountain after their plane went down and crashed landed. In the end, Alpha Flight, who went to investigate and found them, who had a quick tussle with their friends, who at the time thought the city was great, before Loki revealed himself and the mutants were able to unite to defeat him after learning that the powers, magic clothing, and eternal life granted came with a price. The destruction of magical beings like Alpha Flight member Snowbird. Oh no, Snowbird! Fortunately, Loki was foiled, but this was a pretty diabolical plot. Number 3. Bartered with Enchantress's hand. Not my hand! But also, this is very serious. I don't know why I'm laughing, it's very serious, this is terrible. Loki did this not once even, but twice. Both times Idun was not even consulted, and the second time around she was full on tricked by Loki. Idun was known as the keeper of golden apples. She is very important to the Asgardian people because of her being the only person who can pick the golden apples, which are what grant the Asgardians their eternal youth and vitality, making them immortal as well. So it's a really important job. The first time it was Loki who promised, but also managed to avoid Enchantress being married off, but this only resulted in greater trouble for Thor when it was revealed the mason he had bartered with was actually a frost giant in disguise. So he tricked him and then he kind of had to fight a frost giant. That's where Thor comes in. The second time, he once again promised her hand to a frost giant in order to save his own skin from starvation and from his own banishment. This time around, Thor once again had to save the day, but Idun was still imprisoned for a time and likely traumatized traumatized from the whole experience in the end. Number 2. Stole Sif's body. This has to be by far one of the worst things that Loki has done. And what's worse, he did it for the most petty of reasons. Like many of his antics, it was simply to piss off Thor. At first, Thor actually wondered why Loki had returned to life, resurrected in a female form, but Loki played it off as just like, oh, this is just some coincidence, I just happened to be reincarnated in a female body, don't worry about it. Later, however, we'd learn about the horror that Lady Loki really was. Loki in Sif's body, having stolen her body, the body of his enemy, to parade around in and just use as he pleased. Ugh. This also greatly affected Lady Sif even after she had her body back. She remarked how even though she was supposed to be this strong and fearless warrior, she found herself trembling at the slightest unknown shadow, terrified that Loki was lurking around a corner waiting to return and claim her body as his own. Ugh, I don't like that. Number 1. Killed his younger self. Kid Loki was one of the best versions of Loki we'd ever got. And by best, I mean the most honest, the most true, the kindest, the most heroic. He was a trickster, but a seemingly innocent one, a nice one. Kid Loki was on a path of redemption. He was basically a hero, but not even Loki could let Loki redeem himself. Seeing that no one would ever see him as anything other than the god of lies, no matter how much good he did, King Loki took out revenge on everyone around him, eventually even killing his own more naive persona and self, Kid Loki. Or really, more younger Loki at this point. Basically, Kid Loki is like a younger version of King Loki. It's all Loki, but yeah, he killed the nicest Loki. Sad.